Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. When I was younger, my older sister, Julia, and I lived in a house in San Jose, California. Our parents moved in before we were born, after the previous owner, an old man, passed away peacefully in his sleep. They used to tell us stories about how we would play in our room with an unseen friend we called Captain. At the time, my parents thought it was just an imaginary friend, so they asked us to describe him. We told them that Captain was an old man, about 75 years old, with white, wiry hair and a lot of missing teeth. I also remember mentioning his crooked spine. The next day, my parents showed us a picture of an elderly man. It was the same man we had described, Captain. At the time, I was only 5 years old, so I didn't fully understand what that meant. I didn't realize that Captain was the man who had lived in our house before us, someone we had never met. As I grew older, I learned that Captain's real name was Hidalgo Jimenez, but by the time I was 10 years old, I stopped seeing him. My sister did too. Still, I began to notice something strange. Even though I couldn't see Captain anymore, I began seeing other people that nobody else could. I'd tell my teachers and friends about these people, and many of them actually believed me. One story I told about our school principal's father, who had passed away 23 years before, really convinced them. I described the principal's father in perfect detail, even though I had never seen him before, not even in a picture. When I turned 15, I realized that what I was experiencing wasn't something that everyone went through. That's when I stopped sharing my experiences with people, except for my parents and my sister. Everywhere I went, I saw people who once lived wandering around as if they were still part of the world. These figures were always surrounded by a dark gray haze. And sometimes, I could tell if a woman had experienced a miscarriage or chosen to have an abortion, because her lower stomach would be covered in this same gray mist. There were also times when I saw figures shrouded in a red haze. I learned quickly that these weren't people. They were demons. If a demon found out I could see them and interact with them, they would get angry and harass me. I've been possessed several times, but I've always been able to fight them off, usually. One time, though, it was different. I was possessed by a demon that I couldn't fight off. It made me lash out at my sister, and we had a violent argument. I didn't harm her physically, but my parents were terrified. They called the police because they had never seen me that angry before. After the fight, I went to my room to calm down. But when my parents came to check on me about 20 minutes later, they found me asleep. What shocked them were the words "kill" written all over my walls and ceiling. There were 8 instances of the word, and they were written in places that seemed impossible for me to reach. The lowest writing was 8 feet off the ground, and the ceiling itself was about 10 feet high. I couldn't explain it, and neither could the police. I was sent to a psychiatric hospital, where doctors interviewed me for a week. They couldn't find a rational explanation for what had happened. That's when they concluded that there was nothing wrong with me, and I was sent back home. I continued to fight off the demons in my own way, by forcing myself to sleep. Once I was asleep, I could battle whatever entity had tried to possess me, but it didn't make the experience any less terrifying. My parents and I have always believed that my ability to see the dead is connected to something that happened during my birth. I almost didn't survive when the umbilical cord wrapped around my neck, and I was born 2 months early through an emergency C-section. Ever since then, things have felt different, and I'm reaching out now because I need help. I don't know how much longer I can handle these demons tormenting my family and me. Is there anyone out there who knows how to deal with this? I feel like I'm running out of options. This is another story that happened to my late husband, John, when he was between 16 and 18 years old. He had this friend named Larry, who John thought was a bit of a fool, but they shared a love for working on cars back when you could actually work on them yourself, before everything got so computerized. Along with a couple of other guys, they'd spend time hanging out, driving around in their cars, and getting into a little harmless mischief from time to time. Nothing serious, just being adventurous teenagers. One day, Larry came up with the idea of checking out a graveyard in Willoughby, Ohio, where John was living at the time. Larry had heard rumors that the cemetery was haunted. John knew the graveyard he was talking about, but he told Larry it was a bad idea. However, the other two guys who were with them were intrigued and agreed to go. John reluctantly went along just to see if they'd really follow through on it. They arrived sometime after midnight. The story they'd heard was about a girl in blue who was supposedly killed by a train a long time ago. No one really knew if it was an accident or if it had been a suicide, but she was wearing a blue dress when they found her body. There was no identification on her, nothing that could tell them who she was or where she came from. She had left a boarding house she was staying at and boarded a bus, only to be found much later by the railroad tracks. It was a huge mystery in Willoughby at the time, and even years later, people still talked about it. The townspeople felt sorry for her because they didn't know who she was, so they had a headstone made for her. The inscription simply read, "The Girl in Blue," along with the date she died. They didn't even know her birth date, but she seemed to be in her early 20s. No one knew where she had come from or where she was headed. It was a sad, unsolved story. I remember hearing about it a lot, even after I moved away. The legend was that she had been in town to meet a lover but was jilted by him. Heartbroken, she threw herself in front of a train. Because of this, she wasn't at rest. It was said she would wander around the cemetery, searching for the man she thought loved her, but she never found him. The Girl in Blue became something of a local legend in Willoughby. To this day, she still is. So, the guys arrived at the graveyard, and Larry, along with the other two, were determined to see if the legend was true. John, however, refused to go into the cemetery. He stayed by the car. He told them they were being idiots for wandering around a graveyard at night. He also said he had too much respect for cemeteries to go messing around in one. The other guys teased him a bit, but John stood his ground and wouldn't join them. John and I always shared the same values. We both grew up Christian and had our own experiences with the supernatural. We learned early on what you should and should not do, and there were certain places you just didn't go. Over the years, we gathered some wisdom from our past experiences. And looking back, I think that night taught us both an important lesson. However, the Three Stooges, as John later called them, just had to prove how tough and brave they were, so they decided to enter the cemetery through the wrought iron gates, leaving John behind by the car, smoking a cigarette. John said they were gone long enough for him to smoke a few cigarettes and that he could hear them talking from a distance. He could hear their voices getting louder, mixed with some laughing, but he wasn't curious enough to go over and see what they were doing. He just stayed put by the car. About 20 minutes later, John heard Larry calling out to him. John responded, asking what was going on. Then all of a sudden, he heard a loud screech and saw the guys running back toward the gate, looking panicked. Once they reached the gate, Larry was out of breath, still yelling, "Get in the car. Just get in the car. Now man." They piled into the car, muttering curses and shouting for John to take off. Larry was so rattled that, in his panic, he accidentally backed into a small tree before finally getting the car in drive. Once they were on their way out of the cemetery, they started to calm down enough to tell John what had happened. Up until then, John hadn't said a word. He could tell they were scared out of their minds. According to Larry, they were just messing around, daring each other to make a move or do something spooky. They never expected anything to happen, but something did. While standing near the Girl in Blue's headstone, they thought they heard someone walking on the leaves nearby. They looked over to the side and saw a figure coming toward them from about 20 feet away. Larry called out, thinking it was John. But when John answered from outside the gates, they realized something was terribly wrong. They just stood there staring at the figure approaching them. It looked like a man, but the thing that freaked them out the most was that they couldn't see his legs. They could hear the leaves crunching as he moved, but there were no legs or feet to make the noise. They all saw it. At that point, they panicked and ran straight for the gates, not looking back. John admitted that he felt a sense of "I told you so" satisfaction. He had warned them not to mess with it, but they didn't listen. That's why he always called Larry a lame brain. I agreed with him. I met Larry a few months after John and I got together. There was nothing wrong with him, but he was just a natural-born jerk. When I asked Larry about the cemetery experience, he absolutely refused to talk about it. He was still so shaken up by it. As for the girl in blue, she was finally identified in the 2000s. The local paper, the News Herald, ran a special feature about her. Someone had sent the story to other states in the hope of solving the mystery of her identity. They even created an artist's rendering of her based on old autopsy reports and eyewitness accounts. It turned out that she had been an unknown woman who died in the 1940s, and for years, her story remained a mystery. However, in the early 2000s, one of her brothers, who was elderly by then, saw the story and recognized her picture. He came to Willoughby to thank the paper for printing the story and helping to solve the mystery. He said the picture brought closure to his family. For the first time, the girl in blue had a name. A new headstone was placed with her name inscribed on it. I'm not mentioning her name out of respect for her family, who waited so long to find out what happened to her. It's nice that she has family who now knows what happened to her. I wonder if Larry ever saw that story. In 2004, my family and I took a 2-week holiday to a holiday center in Cork, Ireland. If you're familiar with the area, you might know Trabolgan, the holiday center we stayed at. When we arrived, we were immediately disappointed by the state of the cottage. It looked like it hadn't been cleaned properly in years. The place felt neglected, like it hadn't been touched since the Dark Ages. It was me, my older brother Paul, my younger brother David, my parents, my cousin Jamie, and my Aunt Catherine staying in the cottage. The center was mostly suited for kids, with little to entertain adults or teenagers. So Paul and I took turns watching over David and Jamie while the adults had some time to relax. Every night, there was a show in the town for the kids, and the parents usually enjoyed drinks while the children were entertained. One evening, after the show, David and Jamie started to get tired. My mom turned to me and said, "It's your turn to look after them now. Paul has had them long enough." So Paul happily set off to explore the town, leaving me with the responsibility of bringing the kids back to the cottage. The cottage was part of a row of connected houses. From the back entrance, there was a narrow path leading to a large circular green. The whole area was eerily quiet that evening. Most of the houses had their lights off, and the only sound was the occasional chirp of crickets. We entered the house through the back sliding door, and I thought everything was fine. But then, after a few minutes inside, there was a sudden knock at the door. The curtains were drawn, so I couldn't see who it was. Thinking it was my mom, I opened the door, but when I looked outside, no one was there. I stepped out to check around, but it was pitch black. The silence was unnerving. The forest in the distance loomed over the darkened houses, and the air felt heavy with stillness. I assumed it was just a prank, maybe some kids messing around. I stepped back inside, closing the door behind me. But just as I turned away, there was a loud bang on the glass door that made me jump out of my skin. The sound was so intense, it felt like someone had tried to break the glass. In that moment, my mind didn't go to ghosts. It went straight to something much more terrifying. A murderer. My heart raced. I grabbed David and Jamie and locked us in the bathroom. I wanted to run back to town, but fear completely paralyzed me. David began crying when he saw the panic on my face. After a few minutes, I mustered the courage to step outside and check. To my relief and confusion, the area was completely empty. The houses were dark, the street was silent, and there was not a soul in sight. It was as if nothing had happened at all. When I told my mom, she dismissed it. "Don't worry, it was probably just kids playing a prank," she said. But the unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with that house. Over the next few days, things only seemed to get worse. There were no more bangs or ghostly sightings, but something about the place felt off, almost like it was cursed. One mishap after another. Nothing serious, but enough to make us feel like we were constantly fighting against bad luck. So after much hesitation, we did something we never do. We cut the holiday short. We packed our bags and left as quickly as we could. But the strangest thing happened that morning. As we were preparing to leave, tiny insects began swarming all over the skirtings of the windows. It was as though the house was trying to hold us back, making one final attempt to keep us there. I even managed to snap a photo of the insects covering the windows. To this day, I still can't explain what happened at that cottage. It wasn't just bad luck. It felt like something more, something that didn't want us to leave. This happened a long time ago when I was a teenager, those years when you're feeling brave and a little reckless. But in this case, I was the one who knew better. My two best friends, let's call them Dee and Val, wanted to have a slumber party. We had a blast at the last one at Dee's house, so this time it was going to be at Val's. We invited a few other friends, and in total, there were 8 of us. We got to Val's house around 6 in the evening. Her mom had ordered pizzas and soda for us, which was awesome. After eating, we went down to the basement where Val's parents had set up a cozy rec room with mats and sleeping bags for all of us to sleep on. While we were down there, one of the girls told us about a trick we could try. She explained it like this. One person lies flat on the floor while the others gather around. 2 people stand at the head and feet, and the person at the head starts by saying, "This is name, she is dead," and everyone else repeats the same thing. Then the leader says, "She is light as a feather, stiff as a board," and it goes around to each person. The last thing the leader says is, "She will rise and float like a feather." At that point, everyone places 2 fingers under the person lying down, and the group lifts them all together. So we gave it a try. Guess what? It actually worked. Val was the one lying on the sleeping bag that we were supposed to lift. The floor was too dirty, so she laid on the mat. To our surprise, she actually floated. She rose up off the floor and moved toward the ceiling until her nose was actually touching it. We were freaking out, and Val suddenly opened her eyes and screamed. We all panicked and pulled our hands away, shouting, "Catch her! Catch her!" But the scary part was, nobody was holding her. She fell from the ceiling and whoom. Luckily, she landed on the sleeping bag without getting hurt, but she was definitely shaken up. We were completely stunned. We had no idea how it happened. We were all kind of mystified, but before we could make sense of it, Val and Dee, who were the main ones in charge of the evening's events, came up with another idea. They wanted to use a Ouija board. Val asked the girl who lived right next door to her to go home and get her a Ouija board. Apparently, the girl had one. By this point, I'd had enough. I gave everyone a big nope. Not me. I turned to Dee and told her about a session my sister and cousins had done a couple of years earlier, and she was very intrigued by my story. But I told them that I thought Ouija boards were dangerous, not something to be played with. They called me a chicken, and I said, "That's right, I'm a chicken that knows better." I told them I was going home, but I warned them, "You're going to regret messing with that thing." I gave them a quick goodbye and left. I made up a lame excuse for coming home early, said the pizza gave me an upset stomach. Unfortunately, I had to endure a spoonful of Pepto-Bismol as my mom's solution. Yuck. After that, I went straight to bed. The next day, there was a knock at my side door. It was Dee, looking pale and wide-eyed, like she had just seen a ghost. She asked if I could step outside for a moment so we could talk. Once we were outside, she looked at me seriously, her face as white as a sheet. She apologized for calling me a chicken the night before and admitted that I was absolutely right about warning them not to mess with the Ouija board. She told me they'd started out asking silly questions, stuff like, "Who's going to marry who?" and all that typical teen girl talk. But then, they started asking questions they shouldn't have. That's when things got strange. They began hearing knocking sounds in response to their questions. At first, Val thought it was her older brother playing a prank on them. But when she went upstairs to check, she found that he was in the living room with the rest of the family, watching TV. That's when they got even more intrigued. But things started getting weird fast. The knocking continued, and the answers they were getting were unsettling. They could hear strange noises, and according to Dee, they started getting scared. They decided to quit the session and put the board away, but the strange things didn't stop there. As they laid down in their sleeping bags and mats, the temperature in the basement suddenly dropped. It got really cold, and the knocking sounds continued. Then they started hearing footsteps, like something was moving around them. But when they looked, there was nothing there. A couple of the girls even yelped after feeling unseen fingers poke them. At that point, they were all terrified, making enough noise to alarm Val's mom, who came running downstairs to see what was going on. When Val and the others explained what had happened, her mom was furious. She told them they had no idea what they were messing with and warned them that Ouija boards were not toys. They're dangerous, she said. If you don't know what you're doing, you're playing with fire. She then told the girl who brought the board to get it out of her house or she would destroy it with a sledgehammer. The girl quickly ran home and disposed of the board. She was so scared she didn't hesitate. The rest of the night, no one got much sleep. Dee told me that Val would come by later to apologize. And sure enough, Val showed up, along with the other girls, each of them apologizing to me for not listening. I could tell they were genuinely sorry, and I didn't hold it against them. It was a shame that they had to get so scared to realize I was just trying to give them good advice. I told them I was only trying to help, based on my own experiences with the paranormal, how it scared the life out of me, my sister, and cousins. After that, they started listening to me more. In fact, I became the go-to person for anything paranormal. Even now, I'm still learning. I think we all are. I never rubbed it in or said, "I told you so," because I knew they already felt bad and scared enough. Sometimes we all act impulsively when we're younger, not fully thinking through the consequences. This could have been a lot worse, but I'm glad it wasn't. For their sake, I'm glad they got off with just a scare. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When I was in my early 20s, I found myself often visiting cemeteries. At the time, I wasn't sure why, but looking back now, I realized I was developing a deeper awareness of the world, not just the physical world, but also the world of spirits, energy, and emotions. I've always been sensitive to these things. One of my favorite places to visit was South Brisbane Cemetery, also known as Dutton Park. It was established in 1866 and is the second largest cemetery in the state, with over 100,000 people buried there. The history was fascinating. There were well-known figures alongside everyday people, including prisoners who had been executed at the nearby Bago Road Goal. I was especially drawn to the older section of the cemetery. The headstones there were beautiful works of art, and the grand graves of the wealthy stood high on the hill, overlooking the river. I always admired the symbols on these old graves, the stories they seemed to tell. One quiet Sunday afternoon, I went to Dutton Park with a friend. As usual, the place was deserted. My friend wandered off a little distance, and I found myself walking along a row of graves that all looked similar. Then one caught my attention. It was an old grave from the early 1900s. On the surface, it looked like many of the others. Tall, rounded headstone, surrounded by a rusted steel fence with a small gate slightly open. But there was something different about this one. It had energy. I've always believed that rooms, houses, and objects can hold certain energies, but I had never felt it from a grave before. When energy reveals itself to me, it starts off feeling coarse, like static on a radio that's out of tune. If you wait long enough, it begins to settle, and you start to feel something. It's not exactly a physical sensation, but it touches you all the same. Standing in front of this grave, I could sense something. I could feel it, a presence still and quiet, standing by the grave, watching me sideways, trying not to be seen. The grave itself was in poor condition, crumbling with age. It seemed like the person buried there hadn't been remembered by anyone for years. It made me feel sad, like the spirit was aware that no one cared for him anymore. The gate around the grave was slightly open, so without thinking, I gently pushed it shut. The moment I did, I heard a voice. A deep, stern male voice. clear as day, "Don't touch the gate." It came from the grave itself. I froze. This wasn't just a faint presence. It felt real. Something very real was there. I quickly opened the gate back to its original width. In my mind, I could picture an old man, huffing and puffing, shaking his head at me for touching the gate again. I stepped back quickly, retreating to the main path. When I looked back, I could still feel him standing there by the grave. I muttered to myself, "Grumpy old beggar," before heading down the hill and leaving the cemetery. That experience taught me an important lesson. It reminded me to trust my instincts, that if I feel something is there, it's probably real. It also taught me to respect the spaces of others, whether they're living or dead. These days, I try to avoid cemeteries. I don't think they're the best places to be, but every now and then, I still think about that old man. It's sad to imagine that his spirit has been standing by that grave for over 100 years, just waiting. It was 1992, a strange summer. I had just finished primary school and was preparing for secondary school. By this time, I had already experienced 2 encounters with the supernatural and had become obsessed with learning more. That's when my best friend, Jonathan O'Reilly, John for short, and I started a club, the Ghost Club, Beastly Remains. John was eager for his first encounter, while this would be my third. That day, we were both about to lose our childhood innocence forever. The day began like any other. After breakfast, John and I set out to gather clues for a case we were working on. I won't go into the details of that case. It's a story for another time, but it was something that had occupied us for over a year. Along the way, we stumbled upon something disturbing, a crow nailed to the ground by a cross through its chest. It wasn't related to our case, but it felt like an omen. Looking back, it was a sign of the dark events that were about to unfold. Later, we returned to John's backyard, where our clubhouse, his mother's shed, was located. Frustrated by our lack of progress on the case, I threw our findings to the ground and slumped into an armchair we'd salvaged from a skip. John, always the optimist, suggested we go for a walk. Not to look for anything, he said, just to enjoy the day. It was overcast, but the sun occasionally peeked through. As we walked, John pestered me with questions about my previous encounters. He was jealous of my talent and curious about what I saw and felt. "Do you believe in evil ghosts?" I didn't have a concrete answer. "There are good and bad people," I told him. "Why wouldn't there be good and bad ghosts?" Before I could say more, I was hit by an overwhelming sensation, heat, suffocation, and emptiness. I couldn't breathe. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. When I came to, John was beside me, pale and terrified. "You were shaking and screaming," he said. I didn't remember any of it. Looking around, I found myself on a small, unused road. To my left was the factory fence of Martin Savage, tall and spiked. In front of me was an abandoned cottage. "Let's check it out," I said, hoping to shake the lingering unease. The cottage was typical for the area, but its front door and windows were boarded up. We climbed onto the roof, that using the factory fence for support, and found a window slightly ajar. Once inside, the place felt unsettling. One room had a ceiling but no floor, while the other had a floor but no ceiling. As we explored, John called me over to see something. A small footprint, clear enough to count the toes in blood. John's hands were smeared with it. "It just appeared," he whispered, shaking his head. He explained that he had seen the footprint materialize in front of him. The blood, however, was dripping from the top of a window. When he touched it, he realized it wasn't rust. I boosted John up to the attic to investigate, but he jumped back down almost immediately, pale and panicked. Without a word, he bolted for the window. I ran for the front door, hearing footsteps in the other room growing louder and closer. Kicking the door open, I threw myself through, scraping my back on nails as I fell outside. Then I saw it. Flames surrounded me, and I was in a perfect, unburnt room filled with panicked people. I heard myself screaming at them before the vision ended. Back in the present, I waited for John, but he didn't appear. Instead, I heard the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. Moments later, he emerged, falling from the roof with a crunch. John was pale, his eyes unfocused. All he could say was, "Grandpa, I need Grandpa." I carried him to his grandfather's house, where the old man, upon hearing our story, revealed a horrifying truth. Decades ago, his 16-year-old sister had burned to death in that cottage when her dress caught fire. My vision and John's terror made perfect sense. That night, John insisted on returning to the house alone. I protested, but he was adamant. As I waited on the road, I heard hoofbeats and saw something I'll never forget. 6 black horses, a black carriage, and a headless rider, the cache de boer, the death coach. It wasn't for me, though. A girl brushed past and climbed inside before it vanished. John returned, shaken but resolute. "It's not finished," he said. "Though we drifted apart over the years, John and I remained bonded by that day. He passed away later, but I still feel his presence when I walk that road. I know the cache de boer will come for me one day. Until then, I wait, cherishing every day I have." My wife and I moved to Hawaii in 2012, settling on the east side of the Big Island, in a town called Volcano. We lived only about a mile from the famous Kilauea volcano, the world's only continuously active volcano since the 1980s. Our home was a cozy cottage behind a main house, surrounded by lush grounds full of flowers and fruit trees. The most remarkable tree in our yard was a lime tree, standing near the front door. We'd had lime trees before, but this one was different. It was so fragrant and heavy with fruit, I almost felt like it was magical. That is, until the first strange event. You could see the tree from a window near the foot of our bed. One evening, after we had settled into bed, I sat up for a moment, just thinking about the day and the tasks ahead. My wife was already asleep. I was trying to unwind when I suddenly heard a strange humming sound from outside. It was a human voice, high-pitched, like a little boy or girl. At first, I thought it might be one of the grandkids from the house in front of ours. They sometimes visited, and it wasn't unusual to hear them playing. But why would a child be outside in the dark, unattended? It didn't sound right. I sat up in bed and looked out the window, feeling like the sound was coming from the yard. Under the bright moonlight, I saw what looked like a small shadow, a figure standing next to the lime tree. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then I realized it was a small child. The sight startled me, especially since it seemed so out of place. Who would let their kid roam around the neighborhood at night, especially with all the aggressive dogs in the area? I quickly got up and went outside, calling softly, "Hello? Is someone there?" I didn't want to frighten the child. I moved around to the other side of the tree, but the child was gone, no sign of them anywhere. I stood there confused. How could they disappear so quickly in the 10 seconds it took me to get outside? I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a young child in trouble, probably in for a lecture from their parents the next morning. But the next night, as I was drifting off to sleep, it happened again. The humming, the silhouette. I shot out of bed, determined to catch the prankster this time. I rushed outside and ran toward the tree, but once again, no one was there. I circled the house, thinking I might catch them, but there was nothing, just the stillness of the night. I told my wife about it the next morning, and she agreed with my initial thought. A misbehaving child. No big deal, right? But then it happened again, and again. The 4th time, I quickly turned on the lanai light and saw something I hadn't noticed before. A small Hawaiian girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with long black hair. She was wearing a white, pajama-like outfit. When the light hit her, her eyes widened in surprise, and then, just like that, she vanished. Right before my eyes, she disappeared in an instant. It was as if the air had swallowed her whole. I ran outside, searching the yard, but there was no way she could have run into the forest that quickly. The forest was a good distance away, and there was no way she could have moved that fast. My wife was already up, rushing outside to see what was going on. I sat in the deck chair, trembling, feeling cold despite the warm air around me. I was sure my face had gone pale. All I could say was, "She just vanished into thin air." My wife, who knows me well enough to read my skeptical thoughts, looked at me and said exactly what I was thinking. "My dear, you just saw a ghost." I didn't want to believe it. Our life in Hawaii had been so peaceful and perfect up until that point. The idea that a ghost could be lingering around, right outside our door, was something I just couldn't accept. It didn't fit with the idyllic life we built. Over the next week, I didn't see any more apparitions, but something else began to change. That lime tree, the one that had once been so vibrant and fragrant, started to transform. At first, it was subtle. A faint, unpleasant smell began to waft through the yard. I thought maybe something had died at the base of the tree. A bird, maybe, or an animal. But when I looked, I found nothing. Just the smell. It didn't go away. And then, the fruit started to wither. The tree, which had once borne so much fruit, stopped producing altogether. That was the worst part for me. I could live with the strange presence outside, but the tree, it had been such a part of our daily life. I loved that tree. I'm a bit OCD about certain things, and seeing it change like that drove me crazy. The smell stayed with me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong, something sinister. One day, I asked the closest thing we had to a local historian. She was an old lady who lived in the area for over 40 years. I asked her if she knew anything about recent disappearances, particularly a missing child. She told me that when she was younger, there were rumors about a little girl who had gone missing in the area. But it was all very vague, no concrete details. Frustrated, I went to the local police station. I told my story to the desk clerk, but she wasn't having it. She tried to brush me off, saying it wasn't their concern. But I insisted, and she finally rolled her eyes and sent me to the precinct sergeant. He listened to my account from beginning to end, and after a pause he said, "The only case I can think of is an open one from the 1960s, a missing child. It happened long before I joined the department." The sergeant seemed willing to help at least. He mentioned that he had worked with psychics in the past, during his time in Honolulu. He said he could have a detective come by and take my statement, and maybe even search the area. But he apologized, saying that was about the extent of what he could do. 2 days later, a detective showed up. I showed him the house, and in particular, the tree, the one that had started to feel so wrong. But here's what got even stranger. The detective asked, "Didn't you say the tree smells like a dead animal?" I was taken aback. "Yes," I said, "can't you smell it?" He walked over to the tree, sniffed the air, and looked at me with a smirk. "Smells like a lime tree to me." I stared at him. He couldn't smell it. I felt like I was losing my mind. Only I could smell it. How could that be? I didn't know if I was going crazy or if something truly odd was going on. The detective was polite, took down my information, and gave me his card. "Call me if anything else happens," he said, before leaving. A week passed, and I felt like I was going mad. I was angry, frustrated. It felt like something was messing with my head, interfering with my life in ways I couldn't explain. Then one day, our neighbor's Akita dog got out of his yard and came charging toward our property. I'd always liked the dog, but the neighbor had told me to come get him if he ever got out so he could put him back in the yard. I went outside to try and get the dog under control. But then, out of nowhere, the dog stopped dead in his tracks. He started barking furiously, like he was being threatened. His barks were sharp, frantic, like he was in real distress. He yelped and shrieked, running in circles around the lime tree. I couldn't understand it. What could he be reacting to? The neighbor finally came over, apologizing, and dragged the poor dog away. But as I watched him go, I couldn't shake the feeling. I finally had something tangible. Something was wrong with that tree. It was like the dog knew something I didn't, and for the first time, I felt sure there was something more to the strange happenings than I could explain. I dug through the branches, searching for a dead bird or a mouse, anything that might explain the strange smell. But there was nothing, just the foul, overpowering stench that seemed to cling to the air. It was as if the earth itself had been tainted, yet the dog seemed to know something. He was on to something, and I could feel it in my bones. I went straight to the detective, nearly pleading with him to look deeper, to investigate further. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some strange coincidence. It had to mean something. The landlord was involved by now, and after some convincing, he agreed to allow us to sign a search warrant for the property. He didn't want the trouble of having this kind of thing associated with his land, and I didn't blame him. A group of 4 HPD officers showed up, armed with shovels, ready to dig. I watched them carefully, my heart racing in my chest. They worked slowly, methodically. It wasn't long before one of them struck something hard, just a couple of feet beneath the surface. They stopped immediately, and I could feel my pulse quicken as they knelt down to carefully pull away the dirt. As they uncovered the object, it became clear what it was: a burlap sack, rotting and torn at the edges. They gently pulled it apart, revealing something that made my stomach lurch. Inside was a small human femur bone, along with several other bones, scattered in the decaying fabric. I nearly fainted. My head spun, and I felt the bile rise in my throat. I could hardly comprehend what I was seeing. This was real. This was happening. The officers quickly took the remains away, their faces set with grim professionalism. The detective questioned us for about an hour, carefully taking notes, asking about the tree, the smell, the strange occurrences. When the questioning was over, he cleared us and thanked us for our cooperation. He was calm, collected, almost too professional for what we had just discovered. For days, I couldn't shake the image of those bones from my mind. I called the detective, hoping for some answers. The results were more horrifying than I could have imagined. The remains were identified as belonging to a small girl, likely between 6 and 8 years old. The bones showed signs of violence, signs that made it clear this was a homicide investigation. There were teeth, but they couldn't help. The girl didn't have any dental records. This case was years old, and in those days, especially in this part of the island, dental care was sparse. The investigation hit a dead end. There wasn't enough evidence to definitively call it a homicide, and with no leads to go on, the case was marked closed but inconclusive. No killer, no closure. 2 months later, we moved away. We couldn't stay in that house anymore, not after everything we had experienced. But even now, I think about that little girl often. I can only hope her family was able to give her a proper burial and find some semblance of peace. And as for me, well, I never did get my taste for key lime pie back. I'm a 32-year-old woman who recently moved back home temporarily with my parents, along with my little Chewini, Chloe. Growing up in this house, I always brushed off what I saw as my fear of the dark, as my mother put it. But looking back, the things I thought were just my imagination have started to feel a lot more real over time. It all began when I was about 14. One night, I woke up screaming, certain that spirits were in my room trying to attack me. I curled up in fear, crying in terror, but I didn't tell anyone at the time. As a kid, I told myself it was just a bad dream, something I could dismiss. But as I got older, things got weirder. Around 2 years later, I started getting these strange, silent prank calls that seemed to come from inside the house. I called the police, but the calls never stopped. It seemed to me that something or someone was messing with me. I know it sounds crazy, and maybe I watched too many horror movies growing up, but that wasn't the only thing. When I was in 3rd grade, I had this strange recurring experience. One morning, I woke up in that half-sleep state, and I saw a little girl standing in my doorway. She would always try to get me to follow her. Her name was Rachel. This wasn't just a one-time thing. I'd see her regularly in the mornings. Years passed, and I moved into a new home in Pasadena, California, near my parents. It was a 3-bedroom house that my friend's parents owned. They lived in Washington, but the house had a strange history. My friend's brother had told me stories of strange occurrences. He'd clean up in the kitchen, only to find the cabinets wide open, like someone had been rummaging through them, despite no one being in the house. There was also a rocking chair in the lanai room, where multiple friends stayed overnight. Some of them would claim to have seen an old woman sitting in the chair, softly singing an old patriotic song in the early hours of the morning. Curious, we pulled out an old Ouija board. Yes, I know, huge mistake, and began asking questions about who, or what, inhabited the house. The planchette moved quickly, and we asked how many were in the room. It started at 4 and quickly jumped to 83 within 5 minutes. That's when things escalated. We began dabbling in Wicca, trying to learn more about the spirits we'd opened a door to. I seemed to be the key in the group, able to make things happen just by wishing for them. But it wasn't all light-hearted. My roommate, who lived next door to me, began having disturbing experiences. She described seeing a dark cloud hover over her bed at night, hearing a deep voice, and feeling a crushing pressure on top of her. A few nights later, something far more sinister happened. A friend of mine came over, unannounced, and we were shocked to find the living room filled with thick black smoke when we got home, even though no one had been there to start a fire. After researching the events, I found the name of the entity behind it all, but the most terrifying encounter was yet to come. One morning, I woke up to find what I thought was my roommate standing by my dresser. I asked her what she was doing in my room, but her response was odd. She said, "I have a sister." This was strange because I knew she didn't have one. As I looked at her, she began walking toward me, repeating, "I'm not Christy." The tone in her voice shifted from confusion to pure anger, and before I knew it, she was practically at the edge of my bed. It was then that I realized this wasn't my roommate at all, but an angry entity. Her voice was laced with malice as she told me, "You watch us, you see us." The chill of that moment still haunts me to this day. When I moved to San Jose, I thought I'd left all that behind. For a while, things were peaceful. But I started waking up at 3 a.m. almost every night. I'd heard theories that 3 a.m. was the devil's hour, mocking the Holy Trinity since Jesus died at 3 p.m. This time, I was able to sleep with the lights off, but then it got bad again. I needed a light on to sleep, and even then, I felt things around me in the dark. One night, my pregnant roommate told me that the night before, she woke up to see a figure with glowing red eyes staring at her. The figure spoke to her in Spanish, and she took it as a warning to clean and organize the room. My other roommate, Eric, had his own terrifying experience. He began smelling smoke in the middle of the night, every night, at exactly 3 a.m. It was so unsettling that I prayed with my roommates, hoping to rid the house of whatever it was. Then, one night, while trying to fall asleep, the light bulb in my room died. Chloe, my dog, started barking at nothing, and I could feel something watching me. I saw a dark shadow by the closet, and fear paralyzed me. I screamed for help, but couldn't move. I somehow made it to my roommate's room, trembling with terror. They prayed with me, and I was able to sleep, but the fear never fully went away. It's been years now, and I've come to believe that something has been following me for my entire life. Every time I go back to my parents' house, I feel it again, especially in the yard. Our house sits on land that was once part of the Gainsborough estate, with an old stone wall that stretches down half a block, and trees that are well over 100 years old. Before the house was built, the land was full of orange groves. About 10 years ago, I had a rabbit that passed away. I buried it in the backyard, and not long after, I woke up to a strange sight. I saw a man standing in my room. He looked like an old Spanish farmer, dressed in a white shirt, tan vest, and corduroy pants, with a thick mustache that curled at the ends. He was holding my rabbit and seemed to be showing me that it was now safe with him and others. Though I wasn't afraid, I felt a telepathic communication with him, like he was letting me know the rabbit was cared for. I told my mom about it, but she dismissed it. Still, I can't shake the feeling that something in this house has been watching me for years. My dog, Chloe, barks at things in the middle of the night, her hair standing on end, and I feel it too. Whatever this entity is, it's still here, and I can't shake the thought that it's been hunting me since I was a child. I still don't know what it wants or why it has followed me, but one thing is for certain. There's something in this house, something ancient, and it's not willing to leave me alone. My brother passed away at a young age, just 38, and my family and I were grieving deeply. To try to ease our pain, we decided to take a trip to Banja, where we had a cottage. It was a place we often visited, and we hoped it would provide some comfort during this difficult time. At an amusement park, my son wanted to play a fishing game where you catch a toy fish with a fishing rod. After a few attempts, he caught one with a number on it. He went to the section with that number, expecting to find a prize, but what he found were stuffed toy hearts with messages written on them. He randomly picked one and handed it to me. The message on the heart read, "For my little chick, baby chicken." This struck me as odd because my brother, Aljosa, used to call my son Little Chick, comparing him to a character from a cartoon. I thought, what a coincidence. There were so many toys, so many numbers, yet he picked that one. I kept the heart and later hung it beside a framed photo of my son and Aljosa. A few days after returning home, I was working on my computer when I heard my dog, Anna, barking in the backyard. I went outside to check, as she usually barks for a reason. I noticed that Anna was acting strange, whining and circling as though she had seen something unusual. I couldn't see anything, but I was curious. As I walked up the stairs toward the entrance door, I saw a small blob of bright white light on the path. It lasted for a split second before it disappeared. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was imagining it, but then I saw it again, a flash of white light across a tree. I turned around to see if anyone was behind me with a flashlight, but no one was there. It happened again. This time it flashed across the neighbor's house, like it was trying to get my attention. I was in disbelief. A few days later, I had a strange dream where I saw a piece of cloth moving, and I called out to my mother, saying, "Look, Mom, Aljosa is moving the cloth, but we can't see him." The next morning, while I was conducting an online class, I heard the sound of cloth moving. I was so absorbed in my work that I didn't turn around to check, but the sound lasted long enough for me to wonder if something was really there. Then a strange thing happened the night after. My dog was barking again, and my alarm clock, which was set for 6:30, rang at 4:55. This was strange because my brother always set his alarm for similar times, like 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock. I woke up confused and checked the time. I was sure I had set the alarm for 6:30, but it rang early. I couldn't explain it. Before my brother's passing, we had several unusual experiences. After my father passed away 2 years earlier, we would hear doors creaking. My son had nightmares where he would scream, "No, I don't want to go out." The TV would turn on by itself in the middle of the night, and light bulbs would flicker, especially on special occasions. After all these experiences, I am convinced that souls are real and can somehow affect our physical world. I wonder if they are trying to console us or simply learning to interact with us in a way that isn't frightening. If they can move objects, make sounds, and play with lights, maybe they are here to guide and protect us in some way. These are not ghosts I'm talking about, but higher consciousnesses. All these experiences happened in different locations, so I don't think the places are haunted, but perhaps these events are connected to my brother's spirit. When I was in high school, my best friend invited me to her house after school. She drove us there, and as soon as we walked in, I felt something was off. Her house was kind of creepy. It was always dark inside, mostly because the curtains were heavy, and the walls and carpet were all a deep dark brown. The house sat on the side of a hill, so it had 2 levels. One part was like a basement, but it didn't feel like it. If you opened a closet door, you'd find a few steps leading down, and then you could walk up into the attic, which was actually another floor. The main part of the house, the middle floor, had 2 bedrooms, one for my friend and one for her sister. There was also a bathroom and a living room. At the end of the living room, there were stairs that led down to the kitchen, dining area, and a small pantry. Beyond that was the master bedroom. But it was the downstairs area that made me uneasy. I really didn't like going down there. It always gave me this horrible feeling, like something wasn't right. One time, I asked my best friend if she ever thought her house was haunted because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She just looked at me and said, "Oh yeah, it's totally haunted." Then she spread her hands out, pointing toward the field next door. She was full-blooded Native American, and the way she moved her hands, it reminded me of how an American Indian would gesture to describe an area. It was kind of interesting how she did that. She went on, "That field over there was never built on because they found out it used to be a burial ground. Some of the people buried there aren't native, but archaeologists found out it was originally an Indian burial ground. Because of that, no one built here. We think we get visitors from there." That didn't make me feel any better. One day, we stopped at her house because she needed to grab some clothes. She was staying at my place later that night. I went inside with her and was just standing in the front room while she ran back and forth, gathering her things. I noticed that no one else was home, but then I heard sounds coming from downstairs, like shuffling and things moving around. I asked, "Hey, someone's downstairs." I thought nobody was here. She stepped out, listened for a second, and whispered, "No, we're the only ones here." I couldn't help but feel nervous. She stepped beside me, and we listened. I could hear pots and pans moving, and it sounded like a chair scraping across the floor. We tiptoed across the front room and heard footsteps downstairs, getting closer. The sound of the footsteps climbed the stairs. I could hear each one creak, but when I looked down the stairs, there was nothing there, just the sound. I looked at my friend, and we slowly backed up, not sure what to do. The footsteps came closer and past us, walking down the hallway toward her sister's room. The door creaked as it slowly shut. I don't think I even touched the floor as I rushed out the front door. Even so, a little later, I let myself be talked into staying the night there once. In the middle of the night, I woke up to something shaking my feet at the end of the bed, trying to wake me. I saw a shadow, and it scared me so badly that I got up at 3 in the morning and ran home. I love my friend, but her house? Yikes. A few years later, her family moved out. The house is still there, but no one's moved in since. Nobody even goes near it. 2 decades later, it still stands empty. Its secrets locked away inside. But I know what I felt there. It's still waiting. I can tell. It was 1997, and I had just started working at Green Island Resort in Queensland. For my first Christmas on the island, the staff were allowed a private party at the end of the jetty. Management was fine with it because the jetty was 1.25 kilometers long and shaped like a person's arm, so the noise wouldn't disturb the guests. At around 10:30 p.m., the last group of us gathered, carrying our party supplies, excited to join the others who had started earlier while we finished up our evening shifts. The jetty floor was still warm from the sun, and the weather had been perfect all week. At the end of the jetty, we had an unobstructed view of the entire island and the water. But oddly enough, the party started to break up early. One of the girls said, "I'm not going to be caught out here after midnight," and excused herself, heading back. I thought nothing of it. Maybe she had an early shift the next day. But soon after, others followed, and by around 1:15 a.m., only 9 of us were left. 6 girls and 3 guys, still enjoying the warm, starry, tropical night. We decided it was time to pack up and head back along the jetty. But as we were walking, one of the girls suddenly screamed in terror. She pointed at the jetty floor and ran. In an instant, we all looked down and saw wet footprints scattered across the jetty. Everyone started screaming and bolted, yelling, "Run! It's the ghost!" I was frozen, trying to make sense of what was happening. Rowan, the other new staff member like me, was standing right next to me. He too was frozen in place. We both felt this overwhelming fear, but somehow we also felt the need to stay calm. There didn't seem to be any immediate danger. At least, that's what we hoped. I told Rowan not to move and tried to steady myself. When I looked down again, I could clearly see the wet footprints. It was as if someone had just climbed up onto the jetty from the water and stood there, dripping, with water pooling in their footprints. I bent down and touched one of the prints, then looked at Rowan and said, "They're completely dry." He bent down to touch one too, and sure enough, the prints looked wet, but there was no moisture on his fingers. The water pooled as though someone had stepped out of a bath. with droplets still visible between the prints, like someone had walked, splashing water around. But the prints themselves were bone dry. Rowan agreed. You're right. As we stood there, still processing what had just happened, we noticed that the footprints stretched across the entire length of the jetty, both in front of us and behind us. That's when we felt something else, a presence. At first, our instinct was to run, but I grabbed Rowan's arm to stop him, saying, "It's okay. Nothing is going to happen if we stay together. There's something here, and I can feel it." He nodded. "Yeah, I feel it too." Then right in front of us, fresh footprints began to appear, one after another, as though someone was walking toward us. They then turned and walked further down the jetty, as if an invisible person was searching for a spot to jump off the edge, only to change direction, looking for another place. We could see the footprints forming as they were made, but there was no one in sight. For some reason, I felt compelled to call out, "Hello? I know you're a spirit still swimming here under the jetty, jumping off. Maybe you need to go on and rest now. Find peace if you can. We mean no harm, and I know you mean no harm to us. God bless you. Rest and find peace." As I spoke, I gently pulled Rowan to the side of the jetty. We stood there, watching the footprints pause near the water's edge, where the water pooled in the same spots. Then suddenly, we heard a splash, but it wasn't the deep splash you would expect from someone diving into the water. It was more like someone skiing on the surface of the water in a small area. The sound was oddly shallow, despite the high tide. We waited, but then there was nothing. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, both of us deep in thought. But then, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I sensed that the spirit wasn't troubled by us being there. It seemed to just be going about its own routine, swimming and diving off the jetty, as if it was content. When we returned to the staff quarters, the others were eager to know what we had seen. We never told them about the footprints. Instead, they shared a story that sent chills down my spine. Years before the resort was built, a man had dived off the jetty for a midnight swim, but tragically he broke his neck and drowned. I believe this explains the strange splash Rowan and I heard. It wasn't a high splash, like you'd expect from someone diving into deep water. It was much lower, more fitting for someone diving into shallow water, just like it was at low tide when the man dived. We both believed the strange skiing effect of the splash we witnessed was the spirit's body moving in the shallow water after the dive. To this day, after midnight, the man still walks the jetty, scouting for a place to dive. He hasn't harmed anyone or frightened anyone. Those who are scared are just reacting to what they didn't expect to see. He's simply going about his routine, happily swimming and diving off the jetty, enjoying what he's doing. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When I was 12, back in 2004, the new school year was just starting, and my best friend Kate and I met a girl named Sarah. She was really into the paranormal, and soon the three of us were always talking about ghosts and the supernatural. Sarah told us she had been reading about witchcraft and Wiccan beliefs, and she suggested we try out some spells. At first, I wasn't sure if I believed in any of that stuff, but I was curious. Kate wasn't sure either, but we decided to give it a try. We found spells in books, on websites, and even made up some of our own. To our surprise, some of the spells seemed to work. For example, I did one to help me do better on my tests, and somehow I did, even though school wasn't my strong suit. After that, I started to get more interested, but I also felt a little uneasy. I told Sarah and Kate that we shouldn't mess with curses because I'd learned that's considered black magic. But one day, I overheard them casting a curse on one of our teachers. They even made voodoo dolls. One night, when my parents were out, I was home alone. I was sitting at the computer when something strange caught my eye. There was a reflection in the monitor, two glowing red eyes staring back at me. My heart raced as I turned around, but there was nothing there. I could feel heat rushing past me, like someone was standing right behind me. I couldn't explain it. but I had this feeling that something was angry at me, watching me. Sarah had a similar experience. She told me she kept seeing a shadowy figure in her house, but her family couldn't see it. She believed the spirit of a young girl was following her. For me, it wasn't just a feeling anymore. I knew something was there, and it didn't feel friendly. It felt like it hated me, Kate, Sarah, and I decided to stop doing the spells after a while. We realized we had opened doors to something we didn't understand. But even after we stopped, strange things kept happening. At home, I started seeing things. One night, I saw black smoke hovering over my bed. Another time, a white face stared at me from the ceiling. One morning, while getting ready for school, I saw a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothes, but with no face. The worst moment came at the end of that year, around Christmas, when I was 13. I was reading a book about myths when I stumbled upon a section about medieval witches. When I looked up, I froze. A dark, shadowy figure stood right in front of me. It vanished quickly with a gust of wind. Terrified, I shut the book and ran to my room. But when I got inside, I felt it again. Even though I couldn't see it, I could sense it right there with me. It felt like it was waiting for me. As I tried to leave, the book flew off the shelf and crashed to the floor. I bolted out of the room and ran outside. I could breathe again. The presence couldn't follow me there. Over the next few years, I went on with my life, but the strange experiences didn't stop. When I turned 15, I dropped out of school. I spent more time alone, and my depression deepened. I started feeling like that presence from when I was 13 had returned. Only this time, it was stronger. When I was alone in the house, I could always feel it there. I heard strange noises, and I felt like it was watching me. It was overwhelming, and at my lowest point, I even considered suicide. Looking back, I think I was sometimes possessed by this thing. I remember one day, I got really angry at my mom when she made dinner. I didn't want to eat, and before I knew it, the plate of food flew across the room. My mom yelled at me, but I had no memory of doing it. It was like I wasn't in control anymore. By the time I was 16, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to try something different. I sat in my room, closed my eyes, and tried to communicate with whatever it was. I didn't believe in demons at that point. I thought it was just an angry ghost. I asked it what it wanted, but there was no answer. Then something strange happened. In my mind, I saw a vision, one where the entity left. I saw myself flying through space, surrounded by stars, and then falling into the sun. It was like the entity was being burned up in the sun. After that, I never felt its presence again. The next few years were hard. I struggled with my depression, had trouble finding a job, and didn't finish my education. But now, at 19, after learning more about the supernatural, I truly believe that what I experienced was a demon. I think it was drawn into my life through the witchcraft I practiced when I was younger. I'm still rebuilding my life, and I'm thankful every day that I didn't end my own. I can't help but wonder what would have happened to my soul if that thing had fully taken control. We had just rented a new place, but it wasn't ready yet. The house was still being painted, repaired, and getting new carpeting. The previous owner had passed away, so his son was fixing the place up before we moved in. We had about 6 weeks before we could move, so we stayed at my grandparents' big house, just down the street. They were what you'd call pack rats, so there wasn't much space for us. My husband, young son, and I all squeezed into one bedroom, and my daughter's crib was placed in the open space just outside the door, near the large living room. The house had this long hallway that formed an L shape. Our bedroom was at the end of the short part of the L, and at our end, there was a pocket door that led into the living room where my daughter's crib was. Now, my grandfather didn't like us using that pocket door when we were kids. He'd go out of his way to block it, sometimes drilling a hole in the corner and putting a pick through it with a lock just to make sure we walked down the hallway instead. I remember the hallway being kind of scary. Even now, as an adult, I didn't like walking down it. The closets on one side always felt like they were hiding something. And the farther you walked down, the more you felt like you had to rush to get to the end. As a kid, my sister and I would huddle together in the back room, scared. We hear footsteps coming down the hall, but when we looked, no one was there. Grandma always told us it was just our imagination, but we didn't buy that. We knew what we heard. Fast forward to when I was in my late 20s, still staying at their house with my family, and those old fears came back. The only difference now was that I could open the pocket door because my daughter's crib was on the other side. My husband went outside for a smoke, and I stayed inside folding laundry. I finished a few pieces of baby clothes and walked through the pocket door into the living room. The light filtering through the sheer curtains made the room dim but passable. As I moved across the room, I glanced over and saw what I thought was my grandfather sitting in the armchair in the dark. I turned to ask him what he was doing, but when I looked again, he was gone, just like that. I froze for a second, and then I ran to the front door and burst out onto the porch. My husband was sitting there, and I tried to calm myself down. He wasn't one to believe in ghost stories, and I didn't think he'd ever admit to seeing something strange. He just took a drag from his cigarette, not asking why I ran outside. After a moment, he looked at me and said, "You saw it too, didn't you?" I was startled. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me, calm but serious, in the armchair in the dark. "You saw him, didn't you? It looked like your grandfather, and when you went to talk to him, he wasn't there." I couldn't say anything at first. I just nodded. He admitted it scared him too. After a few seconds of silence, we walked back inside, turning on every light in the house. The next morning, we told my grandmother about what happened. My grandfather was there, sitting with us. When we mentioned seeing him in the armchair, he said, "Well, I was in bed by 8, long before you guys went outside, so it wasn't me." My grandmother just shook her head, dismissing us. She called it an overactive imagination, saying her house wasn't haunted. She didn't believe in any of that, but I knew what I saw. Later that afternoon, I showed my husband some old family photos of my grandfather. He pointed to one photo and said, "That's him. That's who I saw." I stared at the photo. It was my great-grandfather, the same man I thought I'd seen sitting in the chair. He'd been a prankster in life, often making ghostly noises and trying to scare us when we were kids. He always thought it was funny. That wasn't the first time someone had seen something strange in that house, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. At the time, I was living at my aunt's house with my brother for personal reasons. We had to share one of her rooms since the others were occupied by her and my grandma. It was a regular weekday night, and I had gotten up to use the restroom. This was something I always did because I drank a lot of water before bed, so it was normal for me. When I came back to the room, something strange caught my attention. My brother had his own computer and a chair next to it, with his bed right beside it, so he could easily access everything. As I walked in, I saw a man sitting in his chair. He was as dark as a shadow, but there were features I could make out: wild hair, a jacket, pants, and shoes. He looked almost like Michael Myers from the Halloween movies, except his body was too dark to make out any specific details, just the outlines of his form. At first, I thought it was my brother playing a prank, but when I glanced over, I saw that he was lying on his bed. I froze, thinking it might be an intruder. I reached out to touch the figure to make sure, but as soon as my fingers brushed against his face, he vanished, just like that. I didn't even have time to blink. I stood there stunned, and then decided to go back to bed since I had school the next day. The next morning, I asked my aunt and her sister, who lived down the street, if they'd ever noticed anything strange in the house. They told me that sometimes they heard the gate to the driveway creaking open, as if someone was moving it. But whenever they went to check, no one was there, and the gate was always shut. A little while later, something else happened. This time, my aunt from out of town came to visit and decided to sleep in the living room, since there were no more rooms available. That night, my brother and I fell asleep. According to my aunt, the next morning, She and the other aunt heard the bathroom door slam shut with a huge bang. One of my aunts said she saw a tall, shadowy figure leave the bathroom. She quickly got up and met my other aunt in the hallway. But here's the thing, no one had used the bathroom since my brother and I went to bed. That wasn't the last strange event, though. Another time, my aunt had hired a woman to take care of my grandma. One day, while the woman was helping my grandma to the bathroom, she heard a loud bang from the living room. When she went to check, she found my deceased cousin's photo lying on the floor, as if someone had thrown it from where it had been placed. Then there was another night when I was staying in my aunt's room. She and the other visiting aunt were sleeping in the living room. That night, I woke up to strange voices talking quickly, just like you hear on ghost videos. I couldn't make out what they were saying, so I just went back to sleep. The next day, my aunts told me they'd heard the same voices. The last incident happened when I was at my dad's house. My mom had passed away by this time, and my aunt was home with my grandma. The next day, my aunt called my brother, who was with me, and asked if he had gone back to the house. He said no, and when she asked why, she told him that she'd heard someone or something open the closet in our room. Then she saw the lights under the door turning on, and the computer in the room powering up. She asked my brother how to turn it off when she couldn't. Everything was as it had been, though nothing was missing. A few years later, after I had moved back with my dad, something strange happened again. One night, I became curious about Satanism, so I decided to look it up. Apparently, one of the easiest ways to follow Satan was to simply say out loud that you renounce God and accept Satan as your master. I didn't think much of it and just said the words, expecting nothing to happen. That night, I went to sleep, thinking it was all nonsense, since I was Catholic. But then, I woke up in the middle of the night unable to move. It felt like sleep paralysis, but it was worse. I could move my head from side to side, but nothing else. I tried to call for my brother, but all that came out was a soft, weak, "Help me." Then, to my horror, I looked and saw a man in white clothes and a pointy hat hovering above my bed. He had white facial hair, and though I couldn't see his face clearly, I felt like he was smiling, almost maliciously. He moved his finger from side to side as if warning me. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. That was when I truly woke up, realizing I had probably been caught in a mix of nightmare, false awakening, and sleep paralysis. I began praying to God, and after what felt like an eternity, I was able to fall back asleep. From that night on, I've prayed to God after every supernatural experience, believing I had encountered something far beyond just ghosts, maybe even demons. A few years ago, my mom and I rented a 3-bedroom house. It was just the two of us, so my mom suggested I take the master bedroom. I wasn't thrilled about it because there were two things I really didn't like about the room: mirrored closet doors and a toilet that I could see from my bed. But I figured it's a bigger room, so I decided to go with it. I set up my bed, though most of our things hadn't been moved in yet. I tried to settle in, but something was off. My dog, who usually loved our little bedtime race, wouldn't even come into the room. Normally, he'd race to jump on the bed before me, and we'd laugh as I tried to push him over to make room. But this time, he wouldn't step foot in the room at all. After about 5 minutes, I couldn't blame him. I started getting a strong sense of unease, like something wasn't right. That night, I told my mom I couldn't stay in the room. I said I was moving into the empty bedroom. She didn't want the master bedroom either. We both agreed it didn't feel like there was any evil presence there, just a lot of heavy, negative energy. It felt sad, like the room had witnessed something painful. We both seemed to pick up on the sadness, which isn't surprising, since our family is sensitive to these kinds of feelings. I especially seemed to pick up on emotional energy. Even though I moved out of the master bedroom, I still used the bathroom attached to it. I really don't understand why, because I would literally run to and from it, trying to spend the least amount of time in that room. My dog never did go in there, though. A few weeks later, we had a repairman over to work on the air ducts or something. He and my mom started chatting about the neighborhood and the town. He was an animal lover, like us, and also a volunteer fireman. He had a lot of interesting stories to share. One of them stood out. He told us that the house we were living in had a really high turnover rate. He explained that at one point, a couple with a baby had lived there. One day, their Rottweiler had mysteriously attacked and killed their baby. My memory is a bit foggy after all this time, but I think we also asked some neighbor kids about it. My mom was tutoring them, and they confirmed the story. It was all so strange and unsettling. Eventually, we moved out of that house. I'm not usually one to read the newspaper, but one day, I noticed an article about a dog attack that had happened in our county. I usually take note of those stories because I love dogs, and I often feel like the dog is the one that gets blamed when humans do something awful or careless. I probably read the article to see what had happened this time. I don't remember the full story, but at the end, the article briefly mentioned past dog attacks in the county, and one of them was about a Rottweiler that had killed a toddler in the same city we had lived in. I can't say for sure if the house we lived in was the same one mentioned in the article, but according to the paper, there was only one Rottweiler that had killed a toddler in the county. And there's no question in my mind that the house we rented was the most depressing place I've ever been in. I can't make a definite connection, but I do think it's more than a coincidence. In the mid-1970s, my parents bought a house in Canaga Park, located in the San Fernando Valley. At the time, they didn't know the house had a dark history. I wasn't born yet, so this story really begins with me. The house was a typical 1950s ranch-style home, with a big backyard and a swimming pool. There was also an olive tree in the yard that had been planted in the 1800s. The neighborhood was built on land sold off by Workman Ranch, which was about a mile away. A small park called Shadow Ranch is all that remains of that ranch today. When I was around 3 years old, I had my first strange experience in the house. One night, I woke up, turned on the light in my room, and saw a shadow on the floor. It looked like a person curled up in a fetal position. After about 10 seconds, it swirled away. I wasn't scared though. I just stared at it. To this day, I remember it like it happened yesterday. The shadow had the shape of a man, and it looked almost three-dimensional. After that, strange things started happening more often, and I began to feel uneasy in my room. Over time, I became so scared I couldn't sleep there anymore. My parents let me sleep in their room, and I made a little bed at the foot of their bed on the floor. One night, I woke up to a sharp burning pain on the bottom of my foot. I looked up and saw a shadow person leaning against the doorway, just staring at me. It stayed there for about 10 seconds, and I was terrified. That fear stayed with me for a long time. For the next several years, strange and creepy things kept happening. Once, while I was alone in my parents' room, I saw the bunny ears on the old TV move by themselves, spinning in circles. I never told my parents about the shadow people or how scared I was. At the time, my mom was pregnant with my brother. When I was around 6 or 7 years old, another frightening event occurred. My brother was about 4. We were playing in my room, trying to make baskets with a Nerf basketball hoop that was mounted above the door. One day, the foam ball got stuck between the top of the door and the hoop. I stood on a table to try and reach it, but the next thing I remember, my dad was lifting me up, pulling my head out of the hoop. I was way too short for my head to reach the top of the door, even standing on the table. It felt like something in the house was trying to hang me. This is when I finally started telling my parents that I was scared of the house, though I still didn't mention the shadow people. Over the next few years, there were many small, creepy events. There was also a reddish stain on the ceiling in the corner of my parents' room. No matter how many times it was bleached, painted over, and patched up, the stain would always come back. Eventually, we moved out of that house after my sister was born. As I got older, I started talking to my parents about the strange things I had experienced there. My dad, who isn't very open-minded about ghosts, admitted that the house felt weird. My mom told me that shortly after we moved in, one of the neighbors shared a disturbing story about the house. Apparently, in the 1960s, 3 drug dealers had lived there. One night, during a party, someone they owed money to came in with a shotgun and killed all three of them. At the time, realtors didn't have to disclose if there had been any murders in the house, so my parents had no idea when they bought it. Now, years later, I still think about the events that happened in that house. Every once in a while, I drive by it, and I wonder if the people who live there now experience anything strange. I even wonder if the house were ever for sale again, if I go inside to see what it's like now. But for now, the memories of my old house are enough. The earliest paranormal experience I remember happened when I was just 5 years old. I always thought it would stop when I started college 2 years ago, but I was wrong. In fact, it only seemed to get worse. I attend Mills College, a private all-women's school, and it has a lot of history. If you ask the students, many of them will tell you about their own ghostly encounters. My first year was rough. I'll share more about that another time, but it's when the nightmares started. By the second semester, I was having night terrors every single night. The dreams were always the same, horrible and vivid. I could smell things, hear things, and the feeling was so real. I'd wake up screaming, alone in my room, with no roommate to talk to. I'd leave the lights on, but I still couldn't sleep. But I had to sleep, didn't I? And that's when it would start. He would trap me in different places. A temple, a house, sometimes even a hospital room or my own bedroom. It changed each night, but I always knew what would happen. He'd kill anyone who was with me, and then his little helpers would grab hold of me. They weren't as big as he was, but their red, rough skin and black eyes were terrifying. They'd hold me down, their grips tightening on my legs as I tried to get away. When they knew I couldn't escape, he would come. I always call him he, because that's all I can think of when I see him. His eyes are pitch black, and that's all I can really remember. It's like my mind can't even process his full form. He's part lizard, part bull, part shadow, tall, bulky, and covered in rough skin. I thought it was just nightmares, just my mind playing tricks on me. Until I went home for the summer. I sleep in the same room as my younger siblings, now 17, 15, and 13, and they started noticing something was off. In the mornings, they'd look at me strangely, and finally, one day, my sister asked what was going on. She told me I'd been screaming in my sleep, saying, "No, no, stop." My brother, the oldest, said he heard me moaning, and my youngest brother thought he was the only one who noticed. I explained to them that I was having bad nightmares, and told them to wake me up next time if it happened again. That night, the nightmares came back. My sister heard me moaning and shook me awake. I woke up screaming, and my dad came rushing in. He asked if I was okay, and I said, "Yeah." I woke up and saw her face. It scared me. I'm fine. They all laughed, but I didn't want them to worry about what was really happening. But before my sister even shook me awake, something strange happened. I woke up, but I couldn't move. It felt like sleep paralysis, but I could move the upper half of my body. Then I felt a prickling on my legs, like something was crawling up them, and heavy pressure on my stomach. It felt like someone was on top of me, and I wanted to scream. But before I could, whatever it was, somehow, put me to sleep again. By the time my second year of college started, I had my mom bless my room. I didn't have any nightmares after that, but I could still sense when he was near. I could feel him getting angry. I don't know why, but I taunted him one night, saying, "I bet you're mad because I don't fear you anymore." That night, around 8 p.m., I went to my room to do some homework. But as I sat down, I heard that growl, the one I knew all too well. I didn't want to deal with it, so I grabbed my things and went to my friend Laura's room to finish up. I tried to get a good 7 hours of sleep, so at midnight, I went back to my room. I opened the door, closed it behind me, and set my books down on my bed. I turned to the left to brush my teeth, and that's when my heart stopped. There, on my new dresser, were 3 deep scratches starting from the middle and running down. I froze. I had my toothbrush still in my mouth, and I just ran out of the room. I didn't even lock the door. I just ran down the hall to Laura's room. She saw the look on my face and quickly grabbed my arm. "Let's go," she said. "You're sleeping in my room tonight." We didn't even bother to lock my room behind us. After that, things got a little crazy with finals and an accident that left me with a concussion. I couldn't think about the scratches or the nightmares. I spent the next 2 months recovering. But 3 weeks ago, something happened. I was leaving my boyfriend's house at 11:34 p.m. when we turned left by the back gate. That's when I saw him again. I gasped and almost stumbled back into the wall. My boyfriend caught me and laughed a little, asking, "Are you okay?" I nodded, but once I was safe in bed, I texted him, "I know you don't believe in this kind of thing, but he's back. I saw him, and this time he's not playing around. He's taunting me." About a year ago, my parents went on a road trip to St. Louis to visit my dad's side of the family. They left me at home to watch the place while they were gone for a week or two. One night, around 2 o'clock in the morning, my girlfriend and I were watching movies when all of a sudden, my dog started barking, loudly. They kept barking for a good 5 minutes. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a man's voice, a deep, angry voice, say, "Chef, be quiet." It was so clear, and the tone was furious. I swear, I wasn't drinking, and I've never done any drugs in my life. It was just there. I remember feeling a chill run through me. I quickly went upstairs, and when I reached the top, all 3 of my dogs were standing there, staring up at the ceiling. It was almost like they were frozen in place. As I walked up the stairs, I heard loud thuds coming from the attic, like someone was running or jumping around up there. The noise didn't stop for at least 10 minutes. Finally, I called the police. They came, checked the house, and went into the attic. But they found nothing. No one was there. Everything was quiet again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A few days ago, my parents took another road trip to St. Louis, leaving me in charge of the house again. This time, though, things got even stranger. It was about 9 o'clock in the evening, still fairly early. My girlfriend and I had just gotten back from the movies, and we were sitting in the same spot we had been that night before, on the couch, watching TV. Suddenly, we heard the front door slam. Then we heard loud footsteps, heavy footsteps, going up the stairs. My girlfriend looked at me and asked, "Aren't you going to check who just came in?" I told her it was probably just my brother, that he probably needed to do some laundry or something, but she wasn't so sure. "Don't you think he would have at least said hello?" she said. That made me think for a second, but before I could say anything else, my dogs started barking again, loudly, like they were trying to get someone's attention. I went upstairs to see what was going on. When I got to the top of the stairs, all 3 of my dogs were standing in the same spot again, staring up at the ceiling, just like they had before. Later that night, when I was trying to get some sleep, I saw them again. All 3 dogs were in the hallway, standing there, just staring up at the ceiling. That's when I heard it again, the footsteps, this time coming from the attic. I was terrified, my heart racing. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to check. So I grabbed my shotgun and walked into the laundry room. The attic door is up there, and it was open, partially, like someone had climbed in and forgotten to close it all the way. I called out to whoever was up there, saying, "If you don't come down, I'm going to shoot." There was no answer. I stood there for a moment, my breath caught in my throat. Then, I cautiously went into the attic. But when I looked around, there was no one there. Nothing was out of place. I couldn't explain it. I just went back to bed, still on edge. So what do you think? Why did all of this happen only when my parents were away? Why would the man's voice only show up when I was home alone? This happened a long time ago, probably in the late 90s, maybe 1999 or 2000. I was about 4 or 5 years old at the time. I can't remember the exact date, but I do remember how things would go at bedtime in our house. Mom would leave for work around 8 or 9, and after she left, Dad would give me a shower. Then he'd get my Elmo blanket and pillow, lay me on the couch, and help me start to fall asleep. After that, he'd leave me alone in the living room while he took his shower for about 20 minutes. It was just the two of us at home, Mom and Dad, and me. My sister only came around on the weekends. Now I was always afraid of things. A creak on the floor, a noise outside, or even the clock chiming. Everything made me nervous. I had a big fear of monsters, and there was one thing that scared me the most. A doll named Chucky. I'm sure a lot of people know who he is or have seen the movies. So, there I was, getting ready to sleep on the couch. The couch faced a counter in the hallway, which led to the bathroom where Dad was showering. On the counter was a lamp my dad got from my great-grandmother. It was special. The lamp was shaped like an old sea captain standing next to a boat's steering wheel. The cool part was you could actually spin the wheel. It was old, wooden, and creaked every time you moved it. For some reason, I couldn't take my eyes off the lamp. I was a little spacey at times and often lost track of what was going on around me. Just as I was about to look away, I saw something that made my heart stop. A large, wrinkled hand reached out and grabbed the wheel. It was a thick hand, maybe a man's hand, and it began to turn the wheel slowly. I watched as it spun the wheel about 7 or 8 times. At the time, my vision was pretty sharp, and I could see the details clearly. Looking back, I'm sure it was the hand of an elderly man. I couldn't see anything else, though, just the hand, up to about his wrist. I remember giggling at first, thinking it was my dad trying to mess with me. But then I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. I could still hear Dad singing in the shower. The water was still running. I suddenly felt incredibly hot, sweating like crazy. I couldn't understand why I wasn't scared, but I definitely wasn't calm. It was like my body was reacting, but my mind was in shock. The hand kept spinning the wheel for a few more moments before it came to a stop. It let go of the wheel and disappeared, as if it was never there. The weird part was, after the hand vanished, I couldn't stop looking at the sea captain. His smile looked bigger, spookier somehow. I felt like I couldn't look away. When Dad came out of the shower, he saw how wide my eyes were. He asked if I was okay, and I remember telling him I was fine. He even gave me another shower because I was drenched in sweat, but I never told him or Mom what I had seen that night. A few years later, in 2008, I was in middle school. It was a bright, sunny day, and I wasn't afraid of monsters anymore. Dad's friend, Paul, was over, and they were in the other room talking. I was sitting on the floor in front of the counter where I had seen the man's hand, just watching cartoons. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. This time, it wasn't just a hand. It was the top of an elderly man's head. His hair was combed back and almost white. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It reminded me of Paul, who was in his late 50s and already had some gray in his hair. Curious, I waited until Paul left, and then I asked Dad if Paul had left the room at any point during his visit. Dad replied, "No, he never left." "Why?" I told him what I saw. There was a long pause, and then Dad said, "Oh, maybe he did." His voice sounded a little nervous. That seemed strange to me, but I didn't push it. My dad's not the type to hide things from me. Since then, I haven't seen anything like that again, except, of course, for Paul and my grandpa. But that lamp, the one with the sea captain, is now in our garage, and I can't stand to look at it anymore. It looks so much scarier now. What do you think? Was it a ghost or something else? It still gives me chills when I think about it. My name is Leon, and I'm an OR nurse living in California with my family. Ever since I was young, I've experienced strange, unexplainable things that some people call having a third eye. I used to joke that it wasn't exactly 20/20th vision. A few days ago, I discovered this site and felt it was time to share one of my stories. It happened 2 years ago, shortly after I moved from the Philippines to the U.S. during my first few months here. I kept to myself a lot, chatting with friends I left behind, and going out with my stepsister, who was often alone because her husband was stationed in the Middle East with the U.S. Marine Corps. On my 20th birthday, around winter, My brother-in-law came home to spend Christmas with us. He brought along a Marine friend named Anthony. We decided to watch a movie together one night, and after, we went for a late dinner. Anthony, who drove a two-seater convertible, teased me, and before I knew it, I was driving with him. After dinner, we were on our way to drop off a friend's girlfriend, who lived near the outskirts of Lake Tahoe. Her father suggested another route, but my brother-in-law, who had been drinking a little, insisted we take the longer road to avoid the freeway. Anthony decided to tailgate their car as we followed. Everything was fine until we reached a foggy stretch of road. There were cornfields on either side, completely desolate, and the air felt heavier. Out of nowhere, my brother-in-law suddenly pulled over on the side of the road. We followed him and stopped as well. The three of them got out of their car, and I saw my brother-in-law hunched over near his car. I thought he was just throwing up. Anthony and I laughed about it until we heard them arguing. We got out to ask what was going on, and my brother-in-law, still a bit panicked, said, "I think I hit a woman wearing a long black dress." Anthony and I exchanged confused looks. There was no other car around, no woman walking down the street, especially not in a desolate field at that hour. After some convincing from us and a few jokes about drunk driving and possible court-martial, my brother-in-law decided to drive off. But the light-hearted teasing between Anthony and me suddenly disappeared as we walked back to the car. What happened next is one of those moments I'll never forget. As we started driving again, I noticed something strange. At the edge of Anthony's taillights, I could see an outline of a woman with long, jet-black hair, wearing a long black dress. She seemed to be floating near the back of the car, and I could see her clearly in both the rearview mirror and the side mirrors. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I realized something terrifying. I couldn't see her face. It was the same thing I experienced when I was in 4th grade. Just then, we hit a sharp right curve, and the woman vanished from sight, as though she disappeared into the fog. We were suddenly in a busy downtown area, and the unease I felt lifted a little. I didn't want to say anything to Anthony, worried he might think I was crazy, but I noticed he was sweating heavily, despite it being a chilly night, below 70 degrees. The next morning, I found Anthony outside, hosing down his car. In California, even during winter, frost builds up on cars, so I didn't think much of it at first. But then he turned to me and said, "Thank you for keeping calm last night." I was confused. "What do you mean?" He led me to the back of his car, where the water was running over the trunk. As the frost melted away, I saw handprints, clear, deep imprints on the metal. Anthony told me that he had seen the woman following us too. He knew I had seen her as well because I kept glancing at the mirrors. We both agreed not to tell anyone about it, especially not my parents, who would have been furious with my brother-in-law for driving while buzzed. Anthony and I started dating, and after a while, when we got serious, he admitted something to me that explained a lot. He, too, could see ghosts. I grew up in Los Angeles, surrounded by shows like Supernatural, Ghost Hunters, and movies like Paranormal Activity. Naturally, I always believed in ghosts. As a child, I had an imaginary friend named Rose. No one else could see her, but I never thought much of it. She was kind, always there, and never made me feel uneasy. In fact, she was so kind that I thought she was just an imaginary friend. It wasn't until I got older that I realized Rose wasn't just a figment of my imagination. After doing some research, I discovered that the woman who had lived in my bedroom before us had taken her own life. Her name was Rose. As I grew older, I started noticing more strange occurrences. When I invited friends over, I'd often find that if the ghost didn't like the person, something odd would happen. One time, a friend came over, and while we were hanging out, the lights began flickering, the TV volume spiked to an insane level, and then the power went out entirely. When the lights came back on, we were upstairs, and my computer randomly powered up with a blank document open. Nothing was on it, just an empty page. Then it shut down again. The moment my friend left, everything went back to normal. Next door, my neighbor was convinced that the devil had moved into her house after her sister passed away peacefully. She would scream, bang pots, and shout at the devil she believed was tormenting her. Then one day, it all stopped. The yelling and banging just ceased. When I went off to college, I didn't think much about the strange happenings at home. But when I came back for the weekend, I found the front room completely trashed. I was freaked out but assumed my dad had done it. But when I asked him about it, he denied it. He said the mess was too big for him to have made, and my dog certainly wasn't responsible. Later, things got worse. I started seeing a tall, shadowy figure lurking near the front door, but I never saw it clearly, only in my peripheral vision. It was always there, watching, instilling a quiet but constant fear in me. But it didn't do anything. That is, until I brought my best friend over. She asked me about the ghost in my house, and I told her about Rose, the friendly old lady. But I left out the darker, shadowy figure, figuring it was just something I'd imagined. She then asked if there was a darker shadow, and I told her, yes, there is. To my surprise, she saw it too. That's when we decided to investigate on our own. We set up my iPhone to record in the living room while we went to watch TV. About 20 minutes later, we returned and stopped the recording. To our shock, things on the table had been moved. It was around 2:30 a.m., right near the witching hour, and we were terrified. We decided to drive to Hyperion Bridge, a known haunted spot, to get our minds off the strange events. After passing over the bridge with nothing happening, we sat in the car and played back the recording. It was bizarre. There were no voices or static, just creaking, footsteps, tapping, and shuffling sounds. And we could hear our voices in the background, distant but clear. The weirdest part was that my dog had been in my dad's room, with the door shut, and there was no one else in the house. When we got back around 3:30 a.m., the door to my house was suddenly yanked open, despite the fact that the air was freezing, around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which in Los Angeles feels much colder than anywhere else because of the dry air. We walked in, and the temperature inside was unbearably cold. It was as though the air itself had thickened. Breathing felt hard. We quickly shut the door and huddled in the den, unsure what to do. After that night, I began researching, and the truth came out. It wasn't just a ghost. It was a demon, and it was angry. I spoke to someone about it and learned how to bless my room to keep myself safe from whatever it was. The problem was that by blessing my room, I accidentally expelled Rose, the friendly ghost who had protected me. Without her protection, I was vulnerable. The demon began following me, feeding off my fear and bad moods. It was always with me, and I could feel it. No matter where I went in the house, it was there. I became paranoid, refusing to go anywhere but my bedroom. At night, I'd sometimes open my eyes to see it standing just outside my room or crouching near the door. I could feel it waiting, but it couldn't come inside. My dad, not believing in ghosts, never understood. I had to bless the house when he wasn't around, which made things difficult. I even blessed the bathrooms and the den so I'd have more safe spaces. Some nights, I would sleep in the den because it felt safer than the upstairs bedroom. Eventually, I had the entire house blessed by a medium who told me something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just one demon. There were many. The one I saw was only the most active. They were everywhere. Now that it's all over, I can confidently say that I believe in ghosts and demons. I can't watch ghost shows or movies anymore without feeling a chill. It's not just a story to me anymore. It's personal. When I was 11, I went to my friend Kai's house for a summer party. The weather was perfect for swimming, so I went upstairs to change into my bathing suit. As I walked down the hallway, something caught my eye. I called out, "Hello," just in case anyone was up there, but there was no response. I called down for Kai's mom, and she answered from downstairs, so I shrugged it off, thinking my eyes had played tricks on me, and went into the bathroom. After I changed, I walked out of the bathroom, and that's when I saw it. The door to Kai's bedroom creaked open. I moved toward it and peered inside. "Why'd you open the door?" I asked, but no one responded. Then I saw her, sitting on the bed. A girl I'd never seen before, From behind, she looked strangely familiar in a way I couldn't place. I asked her what she was doing, and she simply said, "Just sitting here." When I asked why she was there, her eyes filled with tears, and before I could ask anything else, she bolted out of the room and rushed down the stairs. Kai's twin brother Jordan walked in just then and asked why I was in their room. I brushed past him and stepped into the hallway, feeling a sudden chill. I asked if he'd seen the girl running down the stairs, but he looked at me confused and said, "You're the only girl I've seen upstairs all day." A chill ran down my spine. I described the girl. Medium red hair, grayish-green eyes, a faded blue bikini, and pale skin, almost like a redhead's. I went downstairs and asked Kai's mom if she had seen anyone rush down the stairs, but she hadn't. I asked everyone at the party, and only one person said they had seen the girl, Kai. He told me he saw a girl looking out the window of his and Jordan's room. At first, he thought it was me, but then he realized I was wearing a black bikini and my hair was brown, not red. He had asked Jordan to check on me. The party carried on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As I was about to leave, hugging Kai, Jordan, and their parents goodbye, I heard crying outside. I stepped out and froze. The girl was sitting on the steps, crying uncontrollably. I asked her what was wrong, and she whispered through her sobs, "I don't know how to swim." I told her I could teach her, promising that I wouldn't let her drown. That's when she said something that sent ice through my veins. "You can't drown twice." Her voice was so low, barely audible, and the words hit me like a cold wave. I ran. I didn't look back until I reached my house, but that night stayed with me. I never told anyone about what happened. Fast forward to this past weekend. My mom came home from dinner with her friends, bursting with excitement. She had the most amazing news. I was going to spend my birthday weekend with my father. My birthday is on St. Patrick's Day, and I hadn't seen my dad in nearly 5 years. I was over the moon with joy and hugged her tightly. She actually told me, "I love you." I rushed upstairs to put the plane ticket in a secret compartment in my dresser. Only I know about it. I felt so giddy I could barely contain myself. Later that night, I fell asleep, but when I woke up on Sunday morning, something was wrong. The ticket was gone. I searched my room, frantic, turning everything upside down. I hadn't seen my dad in so long, I couldn't bear the thought of losing the ticket. I raced downstairs, and to my surprise, there it was, sitting innocently on the counter, as though nothing had happened. I asked my mom and Nick if they had moved it, but neither of them had a clue. I took it back up to my room and decided to hide it better. I tucked it under my bed inside a little Winnie, the Pooh lunchbox I had gotten from my sister when I was 5. "Stay," I whispered to the ticket, making sure it wouldn't disappear again. Then I heard it. Laughter. A soft, innocent laugh of a little boy, echoing down the hallway. I turned and looked, but no one was there. I felt a strange pressure, almost as if something was pushing me toward my parents' room. I hesitated but then slowly walked down the hallway, and as I reached the door to their room, I saw it, the figure of a little boy sitting on the bench at the end of their bed. "Hey," I said, startled. The boy disappeared instantly, just like that. I stood there, heart racing, unsure of what I had just seen. I've been thinking a lot about a recent murder and something strange that happened shortly after, a visit from the spirit of a woman who might have been connected to the crime. This visit happened alongside a strange experience with my son, one that seemed to replay events linked to her death. In my vision, I saw a car carrying her mutilated body. It was headed to a sacred Aboriginal site, but then it disappeared, right in broad daylight. There was also an Aboriginal psychic involved, who helped the police find her body. Before I get into that, let me take you back to where all this began. A few months ago, I shared my story, August, Soulmates 3. Around that time, I was having some intense paranormal experiences, especially related to my mother. I was also having dreams and visions about a friend who was going through a tough time. These dreams showed me things like personal loss and family troubles, things she later confirmed. My wife also noticed some strange happenings at home. One morning, as I left for work, she saw a shadow follow me outside. It wasn't mine. That unsettled her, but I reassured her. I usually keep my paranormal experiences to myself, especially the ones I can't explain. But one night, while lying in bed, I turned over and saw a woman standing just a few feet away from me. She was dressed in black jeans, a black shirt, and a jacket. Her hair was black, medium length. She wasn't a ghost or an apparition. She was solid, a real figure. I couldn't make out her face, but I knew she wasn't someone I recognized. What really caught me off guard was that she didn't move or seem frightened. She just stood there, staring at me as if she was waiting for me to speak. Before I could react, she disappeared. At the time, I didn't know who she was or why she appeared. But now, looking back, I think she was the spirit of a woman who had been missing since June and was later found near a local reserve. My memory of that night is a little blurry, but I believe it happened in the middle of all the paranormal activity at home, around June or July. At that point, I had been investigating psychic experiences to help my friend, and I wondered if I was getting too involved. One night, I had a strange experience that felt like an out-of-body journey. I wasn't sure if I was astral projecting or dreaming, but I suddenly found myself traveling across the universe to a faraway place. There I saw a man sitting at a table. He looked at me with surprise, and his face started to change, twisting into something demonic. But I didn't feel afraid. I walked right up to him, determined not to let him control me. I've encountered dark beings in my dreams before, and I've learned that the best way to deal with them is not to fear them. Without fear, they lose their power. Before I returned to my body, I saw 3 witches levitating off the ground. They didn't feel evil, but I could tell they were connected to my friend's situation in some way. I can't say if this was just a dream, but it felt real. I've come to realize over the years that not everything we experience can be fully explained. Our minds can play tricks on us, and some things are just beyond our understanding. Around that time, I asked in an online chat if anyone knew about a woman dressed in black with medium-length black hair. Then, one night, I had a vision that felt so real, it almost seemed like it was happening right in front of me. I saw the same woman holding a knife above her head. In the blink of an eye, she stabbed me through the chest. I could feel the pain, sharp and real. Even after I woke up, my muscles were still contracting, and the sensation lingered for a long time. It was a disturbing experience, and I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination or something more. I even questioned whether the vision of being stabbed had anything to do with my friend's situation, or if it was just the result of too much psychic energy swirling around me. I've had a lot of experiences like this over the years, but this one felt different. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Today, something happened that I can't quite explain. It all started in first period at school when my friend came up to me. She looked off. Her eyes were clouded. Her skin was pale and glowing. I asked her if she was sick, but before she could answer, she stormed out of the room without even asking for a hall pass. I was a bit confused, so I quickly asked for one myself and ran after her. But of course she was nowhere to be found. I searched down 3 hallways and checked 5 bathrooms. She had disappeared. I gave up and went back to class, and there she was, sitting at her desk, smiling, happy as ever. Her eyes were bright and her skin was all peachy, like nothing had happened. I convinced myself it was all just my imagination. Then, in second period, I went to sit down, and suddenly, I felt someone tug my hair, like a little kid pulling it playfully. I turned around, but there was no one behind me. I was the only one in class, and I was sitting alone at my desk. It could have been my imagination again, I thought. In fourth period, I felt someone tugging on my arm. I turned, expecting to see my friend. Instead, there was an outline of a man holding my arm. Before I could process it, my friend snapped me out of my daze. Again, I told myself it was just in my head. By sixth period, I was heading for the bathroom when I saw what looked like a little girl walking toward a stall. But as I blinked, she disappeared in thin air. At this point, I was really starting to think I was losing it. Later, as I walked home, I spotted something shiny on the ground. It was a locket, reflecting the sun. I picked it up and opened it. On the left side was a picture of a man. His right eye was clouded, like he had been in an accident. A cigar dangled from his teeth, and he had a sinister smile. He looked like someone from the Old West. At least, that's what I thought. On the right side was a picture of a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. She was wearing a modern-day dress. Something about her dress caught my eye. It was white, almost too white. Her hair was long and curly, blonde, and she had the most beautiful smile, but there was something sad about her sapphire blue eyes. It looked like she was guilty of something. There was also a bruise on her left cheek. I slammed the locket shut, throwing it on the ground, but as soon as I did, I found myself picking it back up. It was smooth and silver in my hands. I turned it over and saw the name Emily engraved in cursive on the back. Emily, Emily, Emily. I felt a shiver run down my spine. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. The girl in white, the man, the locket, everything felt so connected. I ran home with the locket, threw my things on the couch, and rushed upstairs to my room. I placed the locket gently on my dresser with Emily facing up. Then I collapsed onto my bed, trying to shake off everything that had happened that day. But when I shut my eyes, it all came rushing back. I saw Emily, the girl from the locket, standing in front of me, crying. There was a bruise on her cheek and scars on her arm. Her white dress was torn, and it came down to her knees. She looked so sad. She said, "Please." Before I knew it, I was the little girl. A man appeared, the same one from the locket. He came toward me, blowing cigar smoke in my face. "What am I going to do with you, Emily?" he asked in a low voice. "Please." I whimpered, but before I could beg, he hit me on the left cheek. The pain was excruciating. "Shut up," he shouted. "You know what this means, Emily." I was suddenly filled with terror, and then he picked me up. I felt like I was trapped in his grip, unable to escape. He dragged me to the backyard, where the beating continued. He dunked my head under water, blowing cigar smoke in my face the whole time. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. It felt so real. The pain faded, and I lost all sense of what was real and what was a nightmare. The pool, it just appeared, and he dunked my head under it again. The terror I felt, the drowning, it was too much. I suddenly woke up, gasping for air, my eyes filled with tears. I started crying uncontrollably. Poor Emily. Whoever she was, she had been beaten and drowned. I reached for the locket, but it was gone. I searched my room frantically, but it wasn't anywhere. Please, if anyone has any information about what I just experienced or what it might mean, please comment or ask questions. I feel like Emily might be the girl in white, and the man. He might be the one who caused the scratches on my cheek when I was younger. I don't know what's happening, but this has to be real. I've been to the doctor and the eye doctor, and they say I don't have any medical conditions. So what's going on? One night, my friend Carla and I decided to spend the night at our friend Renee's house in Union City, California. We were hanging out in Renee's upstairs den, playing video games, chatting, watching movies, just enjoying the night. This den was where we always stayed when we visited, and it was situated near the railing overlooking the stairs. Around midnight or 1 a.m., when we all started getting tired, Renee suddenly decided to share some unsettling secrets about her house, things she had never told anyone before. She confided that for as long as she lived there, she had always felt uneasy, whether she was alone or with her family. There was something in that house that made her feel like she was never truly alone. Rennie suspected that her house was haunted. She explained that it had once belonged to someone who had passed away long before they moved in. Over the past few years, she'd been living there for about 4 or 5 years. She'd heard a number of strange noises, especially at night. Scratching on the walls, objects moving by themselves, and footsteps, but there was one noise that disturbed her the most. She described it as the sound of a little girl singing. At first, Carla and I jokingly dismissed it, teasing her about making up ghost stories. But deep down, we both believed her. Renee wasn't the type of person to joke about things like that. After talking about it for a while, we all dozed off around 1:30 a.m. About an hour later, I woke up to a strange noise coming from downstairs. Since we were sleeping near the railing, it sounded like it was coming from right at the bottom of the stairs. I would describe it as the shuffling of footsteps, maybe even the distant whispering of someone. I pulled the blanket over my head, my palms sweating cold, and stayed still. I thought to myself, if I just ignore it, maybe it'll stop. But the more I ignored it, the louder it became. I couldn't take it anymore. I nudged Carla awake and asked her if she could hear the footsteps or whispering too, or if I was just losing my mind. We listened closely, and the noise continued. Carla and I exchanged wide-eyed looks, both of us in shock at what we were hearing. We decided to wake Rennie up and tell her about the noises we'd heard. It was even more terrifying when we realized that the noises we were hearing were the exact same ones Rennie had been hearing for the last few years. But what scared us more was how unfazed Rennie seemed. She wasn't shocked at all. She'd apparently gotten used to it by now. We all sat there in silence, listening for a few minutes. Then, as quickly as it had started, everything went quiet. We stared at the stairs, but there was nothing there, just pitch black darkness at the bottom. Then, after a few moments of silence, we heard it. The sound of a little girl singing. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough. We couldn't quite make out the words, but we could tell she was singing parts of a song, like someone who only remembered some of the lyrics. During those moments, we were frozen in place, staring at each other with our jaws hanging open. I honestly felt like I might cry. I've never been so terrified in my life. The little girl's song eventually stopped, and after that, there was nothing but complete silence. We stayed awake for the rest of the night, huddled together on the couch, as far away from the stairs as possible. The thought of looking down into the darkness at the bottom of the stairs was too much to bear. The next morning, Renee decided to leave. She couldn't stay in that house anymore, so she moved in with one of us until she found another place. We never found out if anyone else moved into that house, and for all we know, it could be abandoned now, left to sit empty after all the strange occurrences that took place there. But even now, all that's left in our minds is that creepy little girl's song. Every time I think of it, I get chills down my spine. It's a sound I'll never forget. Hi, my name is Brian, and I'm from Swords, Dublin. I've lived in my parents' house for the past 19 years, and during that time, a lot of strange things have happened. Lights flickering on and off, radios turning themselves to different stations. Those were just the beginning. Now I'm 21, and I've come to realize that most of these strange occurrences seemed to target me. Odd noises in the house, strange feelings in certain rooms. I eventually just got used to it. But one night, I had an experience that stuck with me, something I'll never forget. I woke up and found I couldn't move, couldn't speak. It was terrifying, but over time, I learned to deal with it. It happened often enough that it almost became a part of life, but one night stood out more than all the others. I just installed new wooden floors in my room and was sleeping on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by the old, chopped-up floorboards I hadn't yet cleaned up. I turned off the light, just about to fall asleep, when I heard it. The sound of the loose wood being moved around, like someone was pushing it back and forth. I opened my eyes, and there he was. A man, dressed entirely in black, standing over me staring down. I couldn't make out his face clearly, but the sight of him froze me in place. I couldn't move, couldn't even scream. The feeling of dread was overwhelming. Later, my mom's friend, who claims to have a sixth sense, told me she had seen the same man on multiple occasions, along with two women, each at different times. That only added to my unease. It was becoming clear that something was there, something I couldn't explain. 3 weeks ago, I moved out of my parents' house to start a new chapter of my life. I found a place just 5 minutes away and moved in with a friend. The first night in the new house was great. We had a few drinks, settled in, and enjoyed ourselves, just the usual. But after a couple of days, things started getting strange again. At first, we blamed it on the neighbors. Footsteps, bangs, doors creaking. But the sounds continued, and I started feeling uneasy. My friend, a hardcore skeptic who used to laugh at my stories from my parents' house, wasn't laughing anymore. He was starting to feel it too. I began checking every room, every wardrobe, convinced someone was in the house. We hear footsteps upstairs, cabinets banging, doors creaking on their own. One night I was just about to drift off to sleep when I heard the front door open and close. My body froze. It was like a weight pressing down on me, heavy, suffocating. I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. Faint whispers filled the air around me, but I couldn't make out the words. They went on for what felt like an eternity, though it was only about 5 minutes. Eventually, I talked myself out of it. I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But a nagging thought stayed with me. What if something had followed me? Something from my parents' house? The strange occurrences kept happening, small things at first. But last night was the worst. My girlfriend and I were lying on the bed, chatting, when we both heard it. A man's whistle. I didn't want to say anything at first, thinking maybe she hadn't heard it. But the look on her face told me she had. We both went pale. We exchanged a glance, and for a moment, we considered leaving the house altogether. Now, I can't help but wonder, did whatever haunted me in my parents' house follow me here? It feels like no matter where I go, it's not ready to let me go. My friends and I are regulars on the Queen Mary. We've spent countless nights partying, dressed in 1930s and 1940s attire to match the era of the ship. We know the ship so well that some of the staff even know us by name. It's pretty common to see us walking the hallways at odd hours, just another group of ghost hunters having fun. One of the biggest events on the ship is the annual Art Deco Festival. The whole weekend is packed with excitement, and this was Labor Day weekend 2011, one I'll never forget. A close friend of mine and I rented a room together, and we spent most of the weekend going off in different directions, hanging out with various people, but always coming back together at some point. It was the last night of the festival, Sunday night, and we decided to stay an extra night so we wouldn't have to worry about packing up after partying all night. My friend went off with a different group of people, and I spent the night mostly at the bar. By the time I met up with the gang around 2:30 or 3 a.m., I didn't feel like going to bed yet. I was used to pulling all-nighters, and it was our last night to soak in the atmosphere. We were all in the mood for something different. Ghost hunting, of course. I'd walked those hallways so many times, but I'd never really done any ghost hunting in the rooms themselves. I suggested we head to one of our friends' rooms, since I had heard they had a ghost there. The others didn't want to risk getting busted for making too much noise again, so we just wandered the hallways. We found a new staircase we hadn't seen before and decided to go down it. My friend, who's sensitive to these things, suddenly got a strange feeling. She said she sensed the presence of a young man, someone who worked on the ship in the 1940s. He said he had been a waiter in one of the dining rooms, one with green carpet. We chatted with him for a bit. He told us how much he loved his job and how seriously he took it. We suggested he could move on, but he told us he couldn't. He wanted to stay on the ship, to continue working. After talking to him for a while, we moved on and walked through the hallways, making our way back upstairs toward the east end of the ship near the restrooms by the chapel. The girls went to the restroom while the guys waited outside. One of my guy friends decided to have a little fun and see if he could pick up any spirits in the women's restroom. He came out and told us he felt something there. Of course, my friends and I were all curious, so we gathered around to see if we could feel it too. Most of them didn't feel anything, but I did. It was cold, so cold that it sent a chill down my spine. The more people crowded around, the more it seemed to retreat, but I wasn't ready to let it go. I went searching for it, determined not to give up. I found it, and when I did, I could feel something small, something delicate. It was a little girl, under 10, terrified and alone. She told us she had been in the nursery, needed to use the restroom, and her nanny had told her to stay put while she went. The next thing she knew, she couldn't find her nanny or mother. She stayed where she was told to wait, but she couldn't remember how long it had been. We tried to comfort her, asking her if she remembered the year or what room she was in, but she couldn't recall any details. We told her we could help her find her mother or nanny if she followed us. That's when I felt her latch onto me. I'd worked with kids before, so maybe she felt safer with me. As we walked, she stayed close, always holding onto my arm. It was strange, though, when the guys came close, she'd become more skittish, but she'd relax when they kept their distance. After a while, she warmed up to them, and they felt her presence too. We ended up back on B deck, near our room, and passed by an area that had recently been remodeled. We tried opening a few doors, but they were all locked. Then, I heard something, music, In the Mood by Glenn Miller. I turned to my friends and asked, "Do you hear that?" Some of them heard it, others didn't. We walked closer to the locked door where the music seemed to be coming from, and just stood there listening. The tune played for a while before it suddenly shifted into something strange, hip-hop music, of all things. It was eerie, but we couldn't help but laugh a little at how bizarre it was. Eventually, we left the area and went back to our room. Most of my friends were too tired to keep going, so we all said goodnight. One of my friends immediately crashed, too exhausted to stay up any longer. I wasn't ready for bed yet, though, and I had to go check out that closet and the restroom again. I wandered some more, trying to find the little girl again. I thought I might be able to find the restroom, but it was nowhere to be found. I even tried to get into the pool area, but everything was locked up tight. Frustrated, I finally gave up and went back to the room around 6 a.m., a little tipsy and tired, but nothing more happened the rest of the night. I fell asleep, still thinking about the strange little girl and wondering if maybe the Queen Mary will always have a way of keeping its ghosts close. It was November 2005, a Friday night that started like any other. I had plans to meet friends the following evening, so I decided to stay in, relax, and watch some TV. It was just me and my father at home, as he had already gone to bed earlier. It was my responsibility to lock up the house and turn off the lights. As I passed by the holy water font, I blessed myself, something I'd done every night for as long as I could remember. Then I settled into my room and prepared for bed. I reached for a book, but my eyes fell on a small booklet of the Holy Rosary instead. Earlier that week, I had been hearing about the graces that come from reciting the Rosary. Although I considered myself religious, I had never quite understood the Rosary as a child, partly because of its length. But for some reason that night, I felt compelled to say it, even though I wasn't sure I was praying it correctly. I remembered something from the previous Saturday at Mass. While waiting for my grandmother, who was in confession, I noticed a small step-by-step guide to praying the Rosary placed near the statue of Our Lady. I had attended the same church for 24 years, and I had never seen such a guide before. Curious, I took it home and said the Rosary that evening, dedicating it to the holy souls in purgatory. But over the course of the week, my good intentions faded, until that Friday night. With the booklet in hand, I picked up my rosary beads and began to pray. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, the rhythm of the prayers soothing me. But then, at 4:45 a.m., I was jolted awake by the persistent sound of the doorbell ringing. Startled, I rushed to the door and found my older sister, who had been out at her office Christmas party and misplaced her key. After letting her in, I helped her to bed as she shared some office gossip. her voice too loud for the quiet of the house. I didn't want to wake my father, so I told her we'd catch up properly in the morning. Now fully awake, I returned to my room, turned on my stereo at a low volume, and climbed back into bed. A cheesy summer hit played softly in the background, and I couldn't help but wonder how it ever became so popular. But then, from the darkness, just 10 inches from my face, I heard it. A growl. A low, guttural, horrifying growl that shook me to my core. The sound was so loud, so menacing, that I was certain my father and sister would burst into my room at any moment. I was paralyzed with fear. My heart pounded in my chest, and my body was frozen. I kept my eyes shut, praying in my mind that this would stop. But all I could envision was a snarling, evil dog, something otherworldly and hostile. The air around me felt thick and suffocating. It was as if pure evil had descended upon me. In that moment, I knew with certainty that this was no ordinary experience. This was something beyond the physical world. My first instinct was to cry out for help. I began to recite the Our Father aloud, my voice shaky but firm. I blessed myself repeatedly, trying to summon divine protection. As I spoke the words of the prayer, the growling slowly faded into silence. I'm not sure whether the growling stopped as soon as I began praying or as I blessed myself, but when the room fell completely still, I turned on the light without hesitation. I spent the rest of the night praying, unable to shake the terror I had felt. Exhaustion eventually took over, and I fell asleep with the light still on. Looking back, I am certain I was wide awake throughout the entire experience. I was aware of every detail, every sound in the room. The feeling of evil was so palpable that it's impossible for me to doubt what happened. To this day, I believe that it was the devil himself who visited me that night. I can't help but think that my prayers, the rosary, the recitation of the Our Father, had stirred something dark. Maybe it was because the rosary is such a powerful prayer, one that the devil fears. That night reaffirmed the strength of prayer and the protective power that it can offer in moments of fear and darkness. It stands out as one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, but also as one of the most faith-affirming. I learned that night that no matter how dark or frightening things may seem, God's presence is always with us, and through prayer, we can draw strength to overcome even the greatest fears. I've had strange experiences with ghosts since I was very young. It all started when I was about 3 or 4 years old, at my great-grandmother's house around Christmas time. One morning, I woke up and looked out into the hallway. To my surprise, I saw a large gray-white mist hovering in the doorway. I started shouting for my mom and dad, and they quickly woke up to comfort me. I didn't think too much of it at the time, but years later, when I was about 13 or 14, I brought it up to my mom. That's when she told me something that truly made me believe in ghosts. She confessed that she and my aunt had seen the exact same mist in the same spot when they were my age. Hearing her story made everything feel so real, and it confirmed what I had felt all along. My mom went on to tell me that the supernatural had been around me since I was even younger than that. She said that there were always strange smells in my bedroom. In one house, there was the scent of a woman's perfume near my crib. In another, I would often wake up to the smell of chocolate cake in my room, even though no one had baked anything. As you can imagine, after having these experiences, I became more and more interested in ghosts and haunted places. My girlfriend and I started exploring locations known for paranormal activity. One of the most memorable spots we visited was a hotel in San Francisco. This hotel wasn't just haunted. It was also home to a man named Jim Fassbinder, who led ghost tours that started in the hotel and wandered through the surrounding streets. We had such a great time on the ghost walk that we decided to come back and stay the night. The hotel had an interesting history. It had once been a girls' school in the early 1900s, and the woman who ran the school, Mary Lake, had her office turned into one of the suites. According to other guests, that suite had some of the most intense paranormal activity in the hotel. We booked the Mary Lake suite for the night. At first, nothing unusual happened, probably because we were waiting for something strange to occur. Jim and the ghost tour passed through the hotel, and since we were staying in Mary Lake's old office, we invited Jim and the group to come check out the room. But nothing out of the ordinary happened that night, except for some distant laughter and talking around 3 or 4 a.m. It could have just been other guests, but there was an odd, unsettling feeling in the air that made it hard to sleep. It didn't feel threatening or scary, just like something was there with us. From what I had heard, Mary Lake had been a kind and caring woman, and that's the kind of energy the hotel seemed to have. The really strange stuff started happening the next morning. My girlfriend and I went out for breakfast, and on our way back to the hotel, she decided to take the stairs up to our room. She didn't like using the elevator. It was small and creaky, and she was never too comfortable with it. I always asked if she wanted to take it, just out of curiosity, and that morning was no different. As we entered the hotel, I noticed a woman about 5'3" step into the elevator. Since I had seen someone go in, I didn't try to get my girlfriend to take it, but she didn't see anyone, and this time she suggested we take the elevator. We walked over, and as soon as I pressed the button, the doors opened right away. The elevator was on the ground floor. We stepped inside, and the whole thing felt off. If someone had just stepped into that elevator, it shouldn't have been on the ground floor when we got there. It was a strange feeling, but we didn't say much until we got back to our room. Later that day, I took my camera out to see if I could catch any ghosts on film. After taking some photos, I walked back to the room, put my camera away, and that's when the door opened and slammed shut. My back was to the door, so I didn't see it happen, but my girlfriend was facing it and saw everything. We both went over to the door, and after trying everything we could think of to explain it, we realized it was physically impossible for it to open on its own. The door had a pressure hinge, so it should have closed on its own, but it slammed open instead. We were both pretty shaken, and after standing there for a while, we decided it was time to leave. We checked everything, making sure we had our bags and belongings. We were just about to leave the room when the door swung closed and got stuck on the latch. We stood there in complete silence, staring at each other in disbelief. It was almost like Mary Lake didn't want us to forget something. We went back inside, and that's when we realized my girlfriend had left her favorite blanket on the bed. We're both convinced that Mary Lake made sure we didn't forget it. We thanked her out loud for the incredible experience and especially for helping us remember that blanket. Anyone who's ever in the San Francisco area should visit the Queen Anne Hotel. They offer a nightly ghost tour that starts at 7:00 p.m. in the lobby, and I can't recommend it enough. It's an experience I won't ever forget, and I'm sure Mary Lake won't either. When I was 8 years old, my family moved into an apartment we called the Saticoy apartment. It was a strange place, one of the only apartments in the building that had a bar, which my dad loved. When we first moved in, I felt something was off about the place, but I didn't really pay much attention to it. I figured it was just a weird feeling because I was young and had just moved in. Still, there were times when I had to stay alone, and I never wanted to leave my room. For some reason, I just didn't like the kitchen. It always gave me the chills. In the bathroom, there were always little mosquitoes buzzing around the shower. No matter how much we cleaned, they never went away. One day in science class, I learned that mosquitoes are drawn to dead or rotting things. That got me thinking about the house and made me even more uncomfortable. But I pushed those thoughts aside and tried to ignore it. One day, we found a big black stray dog outside and brought it in to rest before taking it to the shelter. My little sister was allergic to animals, so we had to keep it inside for a short while. While the rest of the family was distracted with the dog, I decided to take a shower. But as soon as I stepped into the bathroom, the light flickered, turning off and then back on. I screamed, and my dad rushed in to check on me. He looked scared, but I didn't understand why. A year later, we bought my little brother a new pair of sandals, but soon after, they disappeared. We searched everywhere and never found them. It really seemed to upset my mom, though I didn't know why at the time. After living in the Saticoy apartment for about 2 years, my dad decided it was time to move. we moved to a new place, which we called the Woodman apartment. When I was older, my parents and my older brother finally told me the real reason we left the Sadako apartment. My brother told me that while we lived there, he'd seen the red figure of a boy walk across the kitchen every day. My mom admitted that she had felt strange about the kitchen too. And then my dad told me something that really shocked me. One day, when he was coming home and holding my little sister in his arms, he opened the door to the apartment, and a strong force pushed him back, nearly making him fall down the stairs. I was stunned. That's when I started believing in the paranormal. As time went on, I moved into the Woodman apartment, but I started to wonder if the little boy from Sadako had followed us. One summer day in 2010, I invited my friends over, and strange things started happening. First, my friends Kelly and Emilts came over. We were sitting in my parents' room, eating sandwiches, when suddenly we heard a doll making crying noises. We froze in fear and ran to the door, but when we tried to unlock it, it wouldn't budge. After a few moments, we finally managed to get the door open and ran out of the room screaming. My parents looked at us like we were crazy, but when we went back in, we opened the closet, where the sound had come from, and there was no doll. We quickly decided to go to my room. Another day, my friend Tanya came over. She told me that when she stepped inside, she felt a dark presence. At first, I didn't believe her. I thought she was just trying to scare me after I told her about the Sadako apartment. But a few days later, my friends Emilts and Jack came over, and we were hanging out in the living room watching TV when suddenly we heard a loud thud. All of us got freaked out and ran outside. We stood there watching when we saw the light switch inside the house turn on by itself. No one was inside. Then we saw a dark figure by the window. It looked like it was hanging itself. We were terrified and rushed to my aunt's house across the street. We told my cousin about it, but he didn't believe us. There were many more strange things that happened with my friends Kelly, Emilts, Anaya, Louis, Jenny, Eric, and Jack. But it's too much to write down. After a while, they all became too scared to come over, or they just wanted to visit to see what spooky things might happen. One night, after getting out of the shower, I noticed that the lights were off, but in the mirror, I saw a darker figure with glowing red eyes. I froze in fear but didn't make a sound. When I blinked, the figure was gone. I quickly texted my friend Kelly, knowing she'd believe me because she knew there was something paranormal going on. She told me to be careful, and that made me feel a little better. One morning, my brother told me something that really freaked me out. He said that the night before, when he was sleeping alone, he heard my 3-year-old sister crying. He went to check on her, but when he got to her crib, she wasn't there. He went back to his bed, and there she was, sleeping soundly. How could she have gotten out of her crib and walked to his bed without him hearing anything? It didn't make sense. Now in the present day, my brother and I are both really interested in the paranormal. We've watched Paranormal Activity 1 and 2, and I'm not really scared by them anymore. But my brother, who's 19 now, still has to sleep with my parents. I think it's because he's seen more than I have, and he really believes that these things can happen. The other night, my brother came to me and told me something else strange that happened. He told me that, a few weeks ago, he woke up at 3 a.m. to get some water. When he walked into the kitchen and turned on the light, it flickered, going on and off. He finished drinking his water and turned off the light, but then he saw a dark figure near the dining table, about the height of our mom. He thought it was her and was going to ask if she could get him a blanket, but the figure didn't move. The closer he got, the more the figure moved away from him. When he got close enough, he tried to tackle it, but it vanished. The next morning, he heard footsteps coming from our little brother's playroom. He turned on the kitchen light to see if anyone was there, but the room was empty. Then just yesterday, he was sleeping on the couch when he woke up to something tugging at his chest. When he opened his eyes, there was nothing there, but he couldn't move. He said it felt like something was controlling his body, and he couldn't make a sound or scream. I've been dealing with something strange for about 5 years now, and though it hasn't happened often, it's been enough to make me sure that there's something following me. I live in California, and I'm 17, but I can't help feeling like there's a presence near me wherever I go, whether I'm at home, at a friend's house, or even at work. I can't explain it, and I don't believe it's some sort of mental illness. I'm convinced that what I'm seeing is something paranormal, something that isn't human. The first time I saw it was in the apartment I lived in near San Francisco. It was a small place with a shared courtyard. I was home alone one summer day, just watching TV in the kitchen. I had a cat named Ally who wasn't very friendly, and when I heard a deep, low moan coming from somewhere in the house, I thought maybe she had pushed a door open. The apartment was old, so I didn't think much of it at first. But then I heard the sound again, and I realized it was something different. The noise wasn't coming from a door, and it was far too deep for a cat. I wasn't exactly scared. I'd lived alone before and heard odd noises, but I still decided to check. The house was set up in a simple, linear way. Each room flowed into the next, with the bathroom at the back and the kitchen by the entrance. I walked into the living room, and that's when I heard it again. It was louder this time. I walked down the hall to the bedroom, and as I entered, I froze. Standing next to the bunk bed was something that didn't belong. It was so tall, almost unnaturally so. It was thin, with long limbs, and its hands and feet were way too big for its body. There was no real head, just a sort of mound where its neck should have been. And it was pitch black, like a shadow, but somehow more solid. My heart raced, and I couldn't bring myself to speak. I turned and ran out of the apartment, heading straight to my neighbor's place. He was a close friend, so I knew he'd understand. We looked up the shadowy figure together and found out it was called pareidolia, basically, when our brains make shapes out of shadows. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, but the feeling of fear stayed with me. Months passed without another sighting, but then it came back. One evening, my mom was home, and I saw it again. This time, it was outside on the porch of our second-floor apartment. It was standing still, staring in through the window. I screamed and ran into the bedroom. My mom came rushing in, but she didn't seem too concerned. She just shrugged it off, not really believing me. I didn't see it again for a long time after that. A year or so later, we moved to the East Bay. I thought I had forgotten about the whole thing, but one weekend I went to stay with my grandmother. She lives nearly 5,000 miles away, so it seemed like the perfect getaway. I was about to fall asleep when I saw it again, standing next to my bed. This time, it was doing something odd, like marching in place. I panicked, jumped out of bed, and ran straight to my grandfather. I was shaking, but my family was calm and dismissed it as a night terror, but I wasn't convinced. I did my best to push it to the back of my mind, but it kept coming back. The next time I saw it was a year later, when I got a job as a lifeguard at the community pool. One Friday night, after the pool closed, I was assigned to patrol a hill near the baseball field. As I walked past the pine trees at the base of the hill, I saw something moving. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I got closer, I realized the figure was standing there, staring at me. I didn't stick around to get a better look. I ran back to the pool deck, trying to ignore the fear rising in my chest. The most bizarre experience happened during a sailing trip with my friends. We decided to stay overnight on Angel Island, which has an old, abandoned World War II hospital. While walking through the building, I caught a glimpse of the figure standing outside a window in one of the rooms. I froze, pointing it out to my friend, but when he pulled out his phone, there was nothing to see. The shadow had disappeared, but I could still hear heavy footsteps upstairs. It was unsettling, and though my friend and I agreed we saw something, the others just laughed it off. The most recent sighting was only a month ago. I was at home, doing my homework with loud music playing in the background. I turned around to grab my remote, and there it was, standing in the corner of my room. I didn't even think. I just threw my controller at it. The figure disappeared instantly, like a light flicking off. It wasn't like a shadow fading. It was just gone, as if it had never been there. I couldn't bring myself to pick up the controller after that. I've seen it a few other times since, walking through my house, standing outside my window, even in a friend's backyard. But it's always the same, silent, looming, and terrifying. It's never made me feel like it's watching me, and I never feel any premonitions before it shows up. But every time I see it, I'm filled with pure terror. I can't explain why it scares me so much, but I know I don't want to see it again. It doesn't seem to want to hurt me. It's never approached me or tried to communicate. But the fear it causes is overwhelming. It doesn't feel human. It's too tall, too thin, and its shape is all wrong. I can't make sense of it, and I have no idea how to get rid of it. I just know it's been following me for years, and I can't shake the feeling that there's something more to it, something I can't understand. I don't know what it is. My parents have both told me they've experienced strange things in their youth, but they think I'm just being paranoid. Maybe they're right, but after all these years, I can't shake the feeling that there's something out there following me, something beyond our understanding. Does anyone know what this thing is? Has anyone had a similar experience? I'm open to any ideas or advice, because I really don't know how to make this stop. I'll never forget the night my brother, Paulie, told me something that still gives me chills to this day. He was 13 at the time, and I was 16. One morning, he asked me if I'd noticed anything strange the night before. I told him no, and then asked if he had seen or heard anything. He looked at me and said, "I saw a man in our room between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock a.m. He described the man as being unnaturally tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, maybe even taller. He was wearing a black suit, a white dress shirt, and a thin black tie. But what really stood out to Paulie was the man's face, or rather, the lack of it. There was nothing there, just smooth, featureless thin. The man's hair was slicked back like he was from the 1940s, but the weirdest part was the horns sticking out from the top of his head. Paulie also mentioned that the man had 2 left hands, and his fingernails were like razor-sharp claws. I could tell Paulie was shaken up as he told me this, and he said the worst part was the presence he felt whenever the man appeared. He said it felt evil, like something dark and dangerous was in the room. He also said that when he turned on the light one time, the man vanished quickly, leaving only a puff of black smoke behind, and the air smelled like matches, like something had burned. Paulie also told me that this strange figure was responsible for all the shoes and backpacks being scattered around the room. The man would kick them around, throw them, and knock things off the shelf near the closet. One night, the noise of things falling woke me up, and I thought it was Paulie messing around. I told him to stop and go to sleep, but the man apparently heard my voice. Paulie said that the man started reaching out with his left hands, getting closer and closer to our bunk bed. Luckily, our dog was sleeping with us. He growled, and the man backed away, disappearing into the closet. But that wasn't the end of it. A couple of nights later, the man came back. This time, he started walking toward our bed. Our dog went after him again, and Paulie said the man just tossed our dog across the room like he was nothing. But as soon as Paulie turned on the light, the man vanished. After that, our dog always slept with us. The man would still show up, but he stayed away from the bed, never getting too close to us again. He'd just stand in the room, staring at Paulie. The whole time, I was completely asleep, unaware of what was happening. When Paulie told me all the details, I knew I had to tell our parents. So I did. My dad even drew a picture of what Paulie described. I'll never forget it. It was so evil-looking, so wrong. I remember my brother saying that the drawing looked exactly like the man he had seen. I don't know where that drawing is now, but I do remember my dad showing it to some of his co-workers. They were all just as shocked as we were. Eventually, the man in the suit disappeared after we did what we could to protect our home. We prayed, we sprinkled holy water around the house, and we asked Jesus to protect us while we slept. We're Catholic, and that's what we believed would keep us safe. To this day, my brother doesn't like to talk about it. He still remembers how the man would stand near him, hovering over him, brushing his claws slowly against the pillow, or just staring at him. Paulie said he always knew the man was after him. I don't know how to explain any of this. It was real for us. No one in our family would ever doubt Paulie's word, and even I felt a strange presence in the room sometimes, especially when I was alone. I've had experiences of my own when I was younger, but that's another story. If you don't believe me, that's fine. But if you've had something similar happen, or if you want to share your thoughts, feel free to comment below. Stay safe out there. It all started back in 1995 when my family moved into a big house in Southern California. I was 15 at the time, starting ninth grade. The house had once belonged to an elderly lady, but we didn't know much about her or the history of the house, just that she had moved out because of her age, and she went to live with her daughter. The neighbors, who were Cuban, seemed nice enough at first, but we didn't find out until much later that they practiced something like voodoo. The strange things began one night when my sister, not my youngest, and I were sharing a room. We had bunk beds, and each of us had a window at our bed level. My sister woke me up and told me she heard banging on her window. She asked me if I had heard it too, but I hadn't. She was scared, but not enough to stay awake, so we both just tried to go back to sleep. The next night I woke up to a strange feeling, but I tried to ignore it. I was just about to fall back asleep when I heard the loudest banging on my window. It sounded like two fists hitting the glass as hard as they could. I sat up, my heart racing. I was terrified and didn't sleep at all that night. About a year later, I had my own room. It was around 11:00 p.m. when my youngest sister fell asleep on my bed, so I climbed in beside her, turned on the TV, and kept the night lamp on. The room was well lit, and I was just trying to get comfortable. I was laying on my left side, spooning my sister, when suddenly I couldn't move. I could only move my eyes. I saw everything clearly, the lamp, the TV, even the late-night news playing. But then something caught my attention. I turned my eyes to the right and froze. There, standing next to my closed chest, was a man just staring at me. I couldn't believe my eyes. He was so clear, not foggy or transparent like I'd expect from a ghost. He looked as real as anyone. He was an African-American man, wearing dark pants and a jacket that reached his pockets. His hair was long, curly, and looked wet. What struck me as odd was that he was holding something in his hands. It looked like a bat, or maybe a cane. He was leaning forward, just staring at me. I was terrified, but at the same time, I couldn't help wondering what he was doing there. Who was he? Why was he just standing there? Before I could process anything more, he disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. And just like that, I was able to move again. I still don't fully understand what I saw. Was it a spirit? Did our neighbors bring it with them? I don't know. But that experience was just the beginning. More strange things happened after that, and I'll share those with you later. We were a family of 10, 5 girls, 3 boys, and our parents. The first 4 children were girls, then came 1 boy, then me, followed by 2 younger brothers. William, my second youngest brother, was born in 1980, 3 months premature. My mom had a fall that triggered early labor, and for the first few months, William fought for his life in the hospital. My parents went through a hard time, trying to balance spending time with him while also taking care of the other 6 kids. When William pulled through, it felt like a miracle. The doctors advised my parents not to have more children, warning that my mom wouldn't be able to carry another baby to full term. They even suggested she undergo sterilization. Reluctantly, my parents agreed. But before the procedure, my mom had to take a routine pregnancy test, and it came back positive. At that time, abortion wasn't an option in Ireland, so my mom had to continue with the pregnancy. My dad worked overtime to afford the best private medical care he could, hoping to give her the best chance. This pregnancy was high risk because of William's premature birth and my mom's age -36, which was considered older for having a baby back then. The months were filled with worry, but my youngest brother was born healthy, and my parents were overjoyed. To my mom, he was the child she was never meant to have, the baby she almost lost before he even arrived. She loved him fiercely and became very protective of him. Sadly, my mom passed away in 1990 when my youngest brother was just 8 years old. At that age, he didn't fully understand what was happening. As he grew, he missed her deeply. Whenever we spoke about her, he would cry. Her absence was always heavy on him. When I was around 15, I started having recurring dreams about my mom. In these dreams, she was sitting at our kitchen table with my youngest brother. There was a big pile of sweets in front of them, and my mom was helping him count them out. She wouldn't speak to anyone else, only whispering to him. This dream kept repeating itself for a couple of years, always the same. Then, when I was 17, the dream changed. This time, I saw my mom standing in our kitchen, dressed in the outfit she wore to her brother's wedding. A green dress with a large white hat and matching handbag. She looked beautiful. I kept asking her why she was there, but she didn't answer. She just smiled. After a few moments, she told me she was waiting for someone, and that she'd be leaving soon. Then the dream ended. The next afternoon, my youngest brother passed away. He was 15 years old, and it happened the day before the 7th anniversary of my mom's death. Looking back, I believe my mom had been trying to warn me. Those dreams were her way of letting me know she would be taking her baby boy back to be with her. Though it's heartbreaking, I also find comfort in believing they are together now. It was 1999, and I was 12 years old. My dad was going through a tough divorce from my stepmom, someone he'd been with for 8 years. As things started to settle down, he decided we should rent a house for a while, just until everything with the divorce was figured out. We found a place just around the corner from the house he and my stepmom had bought, and that felt strange to me. There was a small laundry room in the backyard, separate from the house, and for some reason, it caught my attention. Eventually, I convinced my dad to let me turn it into my bedroom. The first night we spent there, I slept in one of the regular rooms of the house. But from the moment I lay down, I felt uneasy. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, like I was being watched. I tried to ignore it and eventually fell asleep. A few days later, I moved into the laundry room. It was small and white, with a bunk bed set up inside. The guardrail on the top bunk was bent, so the bed would rock back and forth if you pushed it. When it was still, it leaned outward a little. I didn't think much of it at first, but soon something strange started happening. Every night, when I was trying to fall asleep, I'd hear a faint scratching noise from the corner closest to my head. It was barely audible. Only in complete silence could I hear it. The sound went on every night, and no matter how much I tried to figure out what it was, I could never pinpoint it. After a while, I just accepted it, falling asleep without giving it much thought. This went on for months. Then one day, my older brother came to visit us from our mom's house in Vegas. We were both lying in bed, me on the top bunk, him on the bottom, talking about the scratching sound. He didn't believe me at all, insisting it was just my imagination. We laughed it off and eventually fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a noise. It was nothing important, just a sound in the darkness, and I quickly drifted back to sleep. But then, not even 2 minutes later, something else woke me up. This time, it was the sound of my bunk bed's guardrail bouncing, like something was tapping it. I opened my eyes just in time to see the rail bounce twice. Still, I thought nothing of it and tried to go back to sleep. But then, I heard the slow creak of the rail moving toward me, lifting up. I snapped my eyes open just as it lifted, and for about 10 seconds, I watched it. Suddenly, it dropped back into place with a couple of bounces. My heart was racing, but I stayed still, frozen in place. I kept my eyes locked on the rail. A minute later, the guardrail leaned back toward me again. This time, I sat up in bed, staring at it, and watched it drop back into place. I leaned over to check if my brother was messing with me, but he was sound asleep, facing the wall, snoring loudly. I sat back on the bed and for the 5th time, watched the rail rise and fall again. Feeling a mix of fear and confusion, I grabbed the rail with both hands to steady it. But the force moving the rail was so strong that my hands couldn't hold it in place. It lifted up, no matter how hard I tried. When it fell back, it did so with a loud bang because of the pressure I had been putting on it. Now feeling terrified, I pressed my whole body against the rail, using my weight to hold it down. The rail fought back, vibrating and shaking until the whole bed began to shake violently. That's when my brother yelled at me, asking why I was shaking the bed so much. As soon as he spoke, the shaking stopped. I jumped out of bed, ran to the light switch, and sat on the floor, shaking. I tried to explain to my brother what had happened, but he just humored me, probably thinking I was making it all up. The next day, I told my dad about it, hoping he'd believe me, but he just brushed it off, saying it was the wind or my imagination. I tried to explain that the windows and doors were closed, and there was no way the wind could have lifted a 5-pound guardrail. But he wouldn't listen. After that night, I didn't sleep in that room again. I moved to the second bedroom in the house, but it didn't end there. A few weeks later, I had a strange dream. I dreamed I was running, constantly running, around the house. I'd run through the front door, out the back, across the alley, and back into the front door again, over and over, like I was stuck in a loop. There was a loud, demonic laugh in the background, mixed with the sound of rattling chains. It felt so real, so suffocating. I woke up in a panic, feeling trapped in my sheets. I tried to get out of bed, but the sheets tightened around me, pulling me back down with such force that it was like something was trying to keep me in the bed. The laughter didn't stop. It was like it followed me out of the dream, growing louder, darker. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. A moment later, I fell back into a deep, dreamless sleep, my heart still pounding in my chest. An hour later, the phone rang. I jumped out of bed and grabbed the phone. It was my friend Jason. He said he'd seen something strange in his room and wanted me to come over. I quickly got dressed, feeling like something in the house was watching me. The feeling didn't go away until I was far enough away from the house, riding my bike to Jason's. After that, I spent the rest of the day at his place, sitting on the porch until my dad came home from work. That night, I thought sleeping on the couch might help, but I was wrong. Things didn't stop. A couple of months later, we got a puppy, a Rottweiler, and a kitten, a calico. One night, I woke up to a noise. When I opened my eyes, I saw that the vertical blinds by the sliding glass door had fallen, as if someone had been holding them open. I looked around and saw that both the puppy and the kitten were sound asleep. There was no way they could have moved them. But with everything that had already happened, this didn't seem as scary, just strange. After that, not much else happened during the last few months we stayed there. But I never forgot the feeling of being watched, of something unseen moving around me, and I never could explain it. It was 2010, and I was living in La Mesa Village in Monterey, California. Strange things kept happening around the house. One evening, I was walking from the computer room toward the living room, and as I passed into the hallway to my room, I walked through a sudden chill in the air. The temperature in the house was usually around 75 to 80 degrees, so it felt odd. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I looked around for any air vents, but there were none. I walked back to see if it happened again, but there was no chill. It was strange, but I didn't think too much about it at the time. As March came around, my mom and I were sitting in the living room when she started telling me something that had happened the night before. She was sitting on the couch near the front door, and I was sitting across from her on the other couch. She told me that while I was out for the night, she and my dad were watching TV. Their Cocker Spaniel, Candy, had been sleeping on my dad's stomach. Then, out of nowhere, Candy suddenly woke up, jumped off the couch, and started barking like crazy, looking out past the living room, through the computer room, and down the hall. At first, my parents tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't listen. Candy usually listened right away to my dad, but not this time. After a while, she finally stopped, but she was still staring at something down the hall. My mom said the spot she was staring at was the same spot I often felt that strange shift in the air. I didn't react to it, though. It had become so familiar to me by then that I just accepted it. As my mom told me this, I felt the shift in the air again, and she paused in the middle of her story, looking over at the corner where the computer room met the hallway. That was the spot I often felt the strange feeling too. "What did you see?" I asked her. She paused, thinking for a moment. I don't know. Maybe a shadow, walking around the corner? I walked over to the corner she was talking about and looked around. The only light on in the room was the living room light, which was attached to a ceiling fan with 4 light bulbs. I asked her, was it a shadow floating in midair, or was it on the wall? It was on the wall, she said, and it was lighter than your shadow but darker than the light. Interesting, I said. Which way do you think it went? She said it seemed to walk quickly down the hallway, just like how I would walk around that corner without hitting the wall. But she said the shadow's movement looked more hurried than mine, like it was trying to get somewhere fast. Later that month, in April, I was recording a song in my room. As I was sitting near the closet, which was under one of the attic entrances, I was surprised to hear something strange in the audio. At first, I didn't notice anything while recording, but when I was mixing the track, I heard it, a faint, sighing sound. It wasn't loud enough to ruin my recording, but it was clear enough to hear. It sounded like someone was breathing near the mic, almost like they were sighing. It wasn't my voice, and it definitely wasn't a mistake I'd made while recording. Around the same time, one evening I was walking out of the utility room after doing laundry. As I passed my bedroom door, I saw Candy standing inside my room. She was looking at the wall, growling and barking quietly, like she was focused on something. I thought maybe there was a bug or light from outside catching her attention, but when I peeked into my room, there was nothing. She looked up at me, then casually walked out of my room. Candy was easily distracted, so I didn't think much of it, but it felt odd. One night I was lying in bed with Candy next to me, waiting for her to fall asleep before I turned off the light. She had a hard time sleeping with the light off, so I kept it on to help her settle. As we lay there, she suddenly looked up at the top left corner of the tall window across from my bed. It was the kind of glance you give when something catches your attention. I looked at the spot she was staring at but saw nothing. I checked the time. It was 11:00 p.m. For the next 15 minutes, Candy didn't look away. Even when I nudged her or called her name, she didn't blink. I said, "You better just be crazy, Candy," a little creeped out. But the strangest thing of all happened when I was looking through some old video footage. Back when I lived in Maryland, I had made a ghost hunter spoof video with my mom's camera. We used night vision to make a funny video in my parents' room, with the blinds closed. I didn't think much of it at the time, but when I looked at the footage, I noticed something odd. I caught an EVP, electronic voice phenomena, on the recording. It sounded like a voice saying, "It appears." Before I interrupted, it was clear, but very faint. It wasn't one of us speaking, and none of my family members were anywhere near the camera at the time. At 1 a.m., my mom, my sister, and her friend were in the living room, and I had just gone into the computer room to check out a strange noise I heard. I left a tape recorder on the coffee table in the living room. When I played back the recording, I heard the EVP, but I didn't catch it on the video. The voice was deep, and it didn't sound like any of us. I began to take this paranormal stuff a lot more seriously after that. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This story didn't happen to me, but to my late husband, John, when he was 15 years old. Even though I wasn't there, I have no reason to doubt his account. Over the years, both John and I have experienced our fair share of paranormal events. John was especially sensitive to these things. He inherited his psychic abilities from his mother's side of the family. It was 1961, several months after the Parma rail station closed for good. John and his best friend, Eddie, decided to explore the abandoned 2-story building to see what they could find. Back then, it wasn't called urban exploration. It was simply called trespassing. They were old enough to know better, but too young to resist. I can't say much, since I'd done my fair share of trespassing when I was young too. The last time I did was with my cousins and sister in Pennsylvania. We were greeted by a farmer with a shotgun, which taught me a very clear lesson. No more trespassing after that. A little background on the station. It opened in 1909 as part of the B&O Railroad in Parma, Ohio. Originally, it was a passenger train station, But in 1913, they added a second story. By 1926, the station switched from passenger service to freight and coal transport, and it continued in that capacity until it was shut down in 1961. The building was torn down the following year, in 1962, which stopped any further trespassing, or worse, accidents, on the property. But before that happened, John and Eddie, curious teens that they were, decided to explore the station and see what interesting things they could find. They waited for the weekend to make the trip. It was getting close to nightfall by the time they made their way to the station. It wasn't far, only about a 30-minute bike ride, but by the time they arrived, it was already growing dark. They each had a flashlight with them, which they would need. They left their bikes near the edge of the property and made their way toward the building. The office door was locked, but they found a large garage door that was slightly open, just enough to slip inside. They entered what looked like a warehouse area with 4 doors along one side that led into separate office rooms. They chose to head into the main dispatch office. Inside, it was pitch black, as there were no street lights around. They shined their flashlights around, taking in the scene. The office was filled with old, metal desks, each one covered with outdated office machines. On the far wall was a huge, old map. The air smelled thick with dust and mustiness. It was clear this place hadn't been touched in years. It was dark inside the station, with no street lights to help them see, so they moved cautiously through the office. They checked out the old desks, opening the drawers. Most of them were empty, except for some old, tattered file folders that smelled musty and moldy. They were focused on searching for anything they could take with them, when suddenly, they both heard it. A steady click, click, click. The sound was coming from nearby, but they were puzzled. The building was supposed to be empty. They shined their flashlights around, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Then, Eddie's voice broke the silence. "John, come here. You have to see this." His voice was shaky, and there was a nervous urgency in it. John quickly walked over to Eddie, who was standing in front of a large desk in the middle of the room. On the desk was an old adding machine, one of those with a lot of keys and a lever on the side that had to be pulled down to move to the next row. John wasn't sure of the exact name, but he thought it might have been a comptometer. They both stared wide-eyed as they realized what was happening. The keys on the adding machine were moving on their own, making the clicking sound, as if someone was typing on it, but there was no one nearby. It was like the machine was operating by itself. The shock hit them hard. They were frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of it, but then Eddie snapped out of it. His face was pale, and he winced as he grabbed John by the arm. "We need to get out of here," Eddie said urgently, pushing John toward the exit. Without another word, they ran out of the building and into the night, heading straight for their bikes. John said later that he didn't know Eddie could run that fast, especially since Eddie wasn't exactly the fastest guy around. When they finally reached their bikes, they stopped to catch their breath. Eddie was almost hyperventilating, looking rattled. His face was pale, and he seemed more shaken than John had ever seen him. John looked at him concerned. "What happened in there?" he asked. Eddie was still catching his breath, his voice quiet and a little shaky. "I heard a woman's voice right next to my ear," he said, looking down. "She told me to stop poking around and leave." John blinked in confusion. "But there was no one else in there but us," he said. Eddie looked up at him, wide-eyed. "I know, but I heard her. She was right next to me. I swear it." When they glanced back at the building, the windows where the office rooms had been, they both saw it. The face and partial silhouette of an older woman standing by the window. She looked like she was from another time, dressed in the style of the 1940s. Her hair was short and curled, a gunmetal gray. She was holding a clipboard against her chest, her expression stern and unyielding. The look on her face was enough to send chills down both their spines. Neither of them said a word. They didn't stick around to try and make sense of it. They didn't discuss it or try to rationalize what they'd seen. They just jumped on their bikes and rode off faster than they'd ever ridden before. They had seen enough for one night. The next day, John went to Eddie's house. Eddie seemed a little more at ease, as if he was ready to talk about what had happened. He admitted something that John had already suspected. He used to be skeptical about things like ghosts, but after what they both heard and saw the night before, he couldn't explain it. "It was real," Eddie said, his voice quieter than usual. "The noise, the woman at the window. I don't know what we saw, but it wasn't just our imaginations." John nodded thoughtfully. "The building was old," he said. "It had seen so much use, so much activity over the years. I think maybe that woman was a secretary who used to work there. Maybe that was her job, and it was so important to her that even after she passed, she came back to that place. Maybe it was the only place she ever felt happy." John paused, looking at Eddie. "I think we disturbed her space," he said quietly, "and she let us know about it." Eddie swallowed hard, his face pale as he nodded, "To the point of chasing us out." It made sense to both of them now. They had invaded a space that wasn't meant for them, and whatever force was there had made its presence known. They never spoke about the incident again, keeping it between the two of them. When the building was torn down the following year, they both wondered, had the lonely secretary finally moved on, no longer tied to her office desk, to the place where she had spent her life working? It was a piece of Ohio history, one they had wanted to explore, but it hadn't turned out the way they expected. John told me that he never went exploring old buildings after that. He stopped trespassing. He didn't need to learn the lesson again. He and I were part of the generation that had to learn the hard way. Maybe these accounts will serve as a warning for younger people, that sometimes it's better to leave certain places alone. Some things are better left undisturbed. Way back in 1972, I was newly married to my first husband, Vil, yes, the bum, but don't get me started on that. We ran off to Kentucky to get married because, back then, you could marry at 16 without parental consent. I was 18 by the time I made the decision to leave Ohio, since 18 was the legal age. Looking back, it was a mistake, but I corrected that mistake a few years later. But that's another story not really meant for this site. After our wedding, we moved back to Willoughby and ended up living with Bill's foster parents. My parents were just relieved to see I was still alive, but they weren't exactly thrilled with Bill. I got that feeling later on, but at the time, I just went with it. We lived in Esther's house, which was a former boarding house. Before I ever met Bill, this house had been home to various people, including one ghostly tenant named Chester. Chester had been an alcoholic and had passed away in that very house. I've mentioned Chester before in a post about Esther's boarding house. When I met Chester's spirit, he was confused, not even realizing he had passed. After some gentle words, I helped him understand, allowing him to move on peacefully. We lived with Esther and Dave for about a year and a half, but the experience wasn't exactly peaceful. We didn't have much privacy. The only time we did was when we were in our bedroom or when we left for our weekend gigs. Bill and I were both guitarists in a band, a four-piece, and our drummer, S, also acted as our manager. She was the one who found gigs and negotiated our pay. That was the only part of my time with Bill that I actually enjoyed. The rest of the time, Bill's laziness kept him from staying employed for long, and he wasn't very good at holding down a job. But those weekend gigs kept us going for a while, paying for gas and food, until I found a job as a nursing assistant at a nearby hospital. Believe it or not, back then, $2.25 an hour was a decent wage. With that, we were able to move into our own apartment, and finally, we had some privacy. The apartment was an old mansion that had been converted into 8 separate units, 4 upstairs and 4 downstairs. We got the one on the far left in the back, facing the street. The rent was only $110 a month. Can you imagine? The apartment was tiny, though. If you stood in the center of the living room and turned around, you could see the whole place. It had a living room, a small bedroom off the living room, a bathroom off the bedroom, and the kitchen. The kitchen was the only decently sized room. There was a door in the kitchen leading to the basement, but we never went down there. We had to do some work to make the place livable. The walls were a hideous yellow color, so we wallpapered the living room. The floors were bare wood, so we put down new linoleum to avoid stepping on splinters. I told the landlords that we were doing the work to improve the place and made it clear that we didn't expect the rent to go up because we were doing all the labor ourselves. They agreed. Once we finished the work and settled in, we didn't notice anything unusual at first, but soon strange things began to happen, and they became harder to ignore. It started off subtly at first, some odd noises above us. The apartment above ours was occupied, so we just figured it was the tenants. But as time passed, the noises grew louder and started happening day and night, especially when we were trying to sleep. It got so bad that it became impossible to ignore. When Bill was at work one day, I decided to take action and called the landlord. I told the wife about the noise coming from the apartment above us, keeping us up all night. At first, she was silent. Then she said she would look into it. I was hopeful the landlords would talk to the person upstairs and ask them to be more considerate, but nothing came of it. The noise only got worse, especially at night. It started to sound like something being rolled around on wheels. Since the floors in all the apartments were bare wood, it was easy to hear someone walking around or moving furniture. We also heard what sounded like hammering nails into the walls. It wasn't constant, but it was incredibly annoying, especially when you're trying to sleep. We knew there were other tenants upstairs, an old man living alone and an older couple. We weren't sure who lived in the other two apartments, and honestly, we didn't interact with them much. Frustrated with the lack of action from the landlords, we decided to confront our noisy neighbor ourselves. We marched up to the apartment above us and knocked firmly on the door, but there was no answer. We kept knocking, more determined than ever, until finally, the woman who lived across from the apartment opened her door. She looked to be in her 40s, attractive, and spoke to us kindly, asking what we were doing. We explained the situation, telling her how the noise from the apartment above was keeping us awake all night. I asked, "Why don't they open the door? Are they deaf? Can't they hear how loud they're being at all hours? We're getting really frustrated with this." The landlord promised to talk to them, but nothing's been done. The woman had a blank look on her face. After a moment, she introduced herself and invited us inside to talk. Her husband was at work, but she asked us to sit down. She offered us coffee, and as we sat at her dining table, she told us something that made my stomach drop. She said, "Don't think I'm crazy, but my husband and I have been hearing those exact same noises since we moved in the year before you did. Hearing you talk about it made me realize we're not just imagining it. The apartment above us is actually empty." Our jaws dropped. Even Bill, the skeptic, was stunned. We were both certain that someone had to be living in the apartment, but she confirmed that the only people they'd seen in and out of there were the landlord and his wife, who came by once a week to clean it. She mentioned that they'd seen the landlords showing the apartment to several people, but no one ever moved in. She paused for a moment, taking a deep sip of her coffee, and then, with a serious tone, she told us something that made my blood run cold. She and her husband both believed the apartment was haunted. I think my exact words were, "Wait, what?" She wasn't joking. She explained that both she and her husband were considering moving out because they were becoming increasingly scared by the strange things happening in that apartment. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked her if she knew why it might be haunted. All she could tell me was that the old man who lived down the hall next to us might know something. He had been living there for many years, but she said they didn't feel comfortable asking him, since they didn't know him well. Feeling braver than I had been in a while, I decided to find out for myself. On my day off from the hospital, I saw the elderly man sitting outside on the porch. The house had a wraparound porch, so I casually walked around to the front to strike up a conversation. I introduced myself and mentioned that my husband and I had recently moved in. I made some small talk, trying not to seem too obvious about my curiosity. I asked him how well he knew the other tenants and whether he liked living there. During our chat, he mentioned an odd man who used to live in the apartment just across the hall from him at the end of the hallway. The man was in poor health and used a wheeled walker to get around. The old man said he thought the guy was a little strange. He would constantly complain about things, and he was always trying to change his apartment by hammering nails into the walls. The old man said it seemed like the guy was never happy with his living situation. Then the story took a turn. The man told me that one day, when the landlord came by to collect the rent, he found the old man lying on the floor in his bedroom. Apparently, he had suffered a heart attack and passed away right there. Everything started to make sense. It seemed like this man didn't realize he had passed away and was continuing with his obsessive behavior as if he were still alive. The realization hit me hard. I shared my thoughts with Bill, and even he couldn't argue with me about it. The man must have been stuck in his old habits, unable to move on from his life. We didn't stay in that apartment much longer. We moved out after less than a year to a much nicer place. It wasn't the ideal start for us as a newly couple to find out our first apartment was haunted, but that's what happened. Our relationship didn't improve much after that, but I couldn't blame a ghost for that. Bill turned out to be lazy and unfaithful. The marriage ended, but I eventually met a wonderful man, John, and we shared many adventures and stories. In the late 1960s, my brother-in-law, Sean, had a rather adventurous past as a poacher. For those who may not know, a poacher is someone who trespasses on private land, hunting or fishing without permission. On one particular evening, Sean was at home with his parents, Eileen and Thomas, names changed for privacy, sitting by the warm glow of a roaring fire. They had just enjoyed a hearty dinner of trout, caught by Sean himself, and the men were sipping on a decent dram of whiskey, while Eileen knitted peacefully by the fire. But then, something unexpected happened. From upstairs, a loud crash suddenly echoed through the house, a noise so intense that it felt like something heavy had just fallen. Without a moment's hesitation, Sean and his father, Thomas, sprang from their chairs and dashed up the stairs to investigate. In the parents' room, they found a large wardrobe, tipped over and lying face down on the floor. As they carefully lifted the wardrobe, both men were horrified to find 3 long, deep gashes slashed across the wooden doors. The marks looked as though something, or someone, had tried to force its way in. The air grew heavy with an unsettling sense of dread. For the next 3 nights, the wardrobe would mysteriously end up on the floor, face down again, no explanation in sight. It was as if some invisible force had a hold on it. But things didn't stop there. One night, Eileen woke up to the sound of soft weeping. It was a woman's cry, full of sorrow and pain, drifting through the house. With curiosity and concern, she got out of bed, following the sound toward the landing outside the bedroom. There she was startled to see the figure of her recently deceased sister, Mary, sitting on the floor and weeping bitterly. Eileen approached her gently, calling out her name. "Mary, why aren't you resting?" To her surprise, Mary looked up with tear-filled eyes and replied, "I want me hairbrush. I want me hairbrush." "Where is your hairbrush?" Eileen asked, perplexed. Mary pointed toward the wardrobe. "In the wardrobe." The next morning, Eileen and Thomas, unsure of what to make of the visit, searched the wardrobe. To their astonishment, they found a small pink hairbrush tucked away among the clothing. The family believed this must be the item Mary was seeking. They took the hairbrush to her grave at the cemetery, leaving it on the tombstone as a token. After that, the weeping stopped. Mary never returned. Back in 1977, my brother-in-law, Sean, had recently married my sister, Meg. After tying the knot in Australia, they moved back to Ireland to settle down, and they lived in a quaint cottage in Kerry. It was during this time that Sean, Meg, and my brother, Liam, had an eerie experience that none of them would forget. Every day, as they made their way through the countryside, they passed by an old, abandoned cottage. Liam, curious by nature, couldn't resist the temptation to take a look inside one day. What he found surprised him. An old, beautifully carved box, large enough to store firewood. It looked like just the thing they could use, so he decided to take it. Inside the box, Liam found an old quilt, large enough to cover his bed. He was thrilled with his find and couldn't wait to show it to Sean and Meg. They were just as delighted, especially Meg, who immediately claimed the quilt. Liam, however, was more interested in the box itself, So he and Sean enjoyed a few beers, chatted about nothing in particular, and then the three of them went off to bed, feeling content. That night, things took a strange turn. Liam awoke from a deep sleep with a cold chill running down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the room with him. He tried to move, but his body felt paralyzed as a creeping shadow slowly slid across the room, inching closer to his bed. He couldn't scream, couldn't call out for help. He could only watch in terror as the shadow came closer and closer. Just as it seemed the shadow was almost on top of him, he suddenly heard both Sean and Meg scream from the room next door. The next thing Liam knew, he was waking up in daylight, the sun shining through the window. He had no memory of what had happened after hearing the screams. He shook it off as a bad dream and went about making breakfast. But when Sean and Meg came out, they looked visibly shaken, tired from a restless night. Liam, curious, asked them what had happened. "Did anything weird happen to you last night?" Meg asked as she poured herself a cup of tea. Liam thought for a moment before remembering the strange sensation and the shadow in his room. He told them about the dream, and as he did, Sean's face went pale. "You weren't dreaming," Sean said quietly. "Our bed. It lifted off the ground in the middle of the night, and then it was dropped back down. And we heard something, a voice. It told us to return the box and the quilt, or we'd suffer." Liam, still processing what Sean said, knew what he had to do. They all agreed to go back to the abandoned cottage and return the box and quilt, hoping to rid themselves of whatever was haunting them. When they did, the strange occurrences stopped. The shadows, the eerie sensations, and the unsettling dreams all faded away. The lesson they learned that night was simple. Sometimes it's best to leave things where they are. You never know what might be attached to them. I'm from Kerala, a state in southern India, and I'm a marine engineer. This story I'm about to share happened to me 3 years ago. A little about myself before I get into the story. As a marine engineer, my job is to take care of the machinery on ships. To become an officer on a merchant ship, we need to pass exams conducted by the government, and we get a competency certificate once we pass. This incident took place while I was preparing for one of those exams. It was November 2020 when this happened. The exam I was taking had 6 written papers, all back to back. The exam center was in Kochi, Kerala, about a 4-hour drive from my home. So instead of driving back and forth every day, I decided to stay at a hotel near the exam center. I found a decent hotel on a booking app. It wasn't too expensive, but it had good amenities. For privacy reasons, I won't mention the name of the hotel. I reached the hotel the evening before my exam. Around 9 p.m. I had dinner on my way there. Once I got to the hotel, I took my books, studied for about 2 hours, and then went to bed to rest for the next day. The first day of the exam went smoothly without any problems. However, on the second day after I finished my exam, I returned to my hotel room and suddenly felt something strange. I can't really explain it, but it felt like there was something wrong, like I wasn't alone or that someone was watching me. I regularly practice prayer rituals called japa, using mantras of different gods and goddesses. I also perform pujas regularly. Because of this, I'm usually able to sense if something feels off before it actually happens. At first, I couldn't shake the feeling, but after some time it faded and I forgot about it. The rest of the day went by without any issues. The next day, after finishing my exam and heading back to my room, I felt that strange feeling again. It's important to note that during these days at the hotel, I wasn't doing my usual prayer rituals. I was still reciting mantras, but it wasn't the same as my regular practices. Everything seemed normal after I finished my japa that day. I felt a sense of calm, and for the first time in days, I thought maybe I was just imagining things. However, that night, the unsettling feeling returned. I went to bed around 11:30 p.m., and after a few hours of sleep, I woke up suddenly around 2:30 or 3 o'clock a.m. I felt a presence in the room, like someone was watching me. I stayed still, hoping it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but as I opened my eyes, I felt something heavy pressing down on me, like someone or something was lying on top of me. The weight was so intense that I couldn't move. I closed my eyes, hoping it would stop, but when I tried to open them again, I couldn't. I wanted to recite a mantra, something to protect me, but I couldn't finish the words. Every time I tried, the mantra slipped from my mind, and I couldn't remember it. The struggle continued for what felt like an eternity. I was drenched in sweat, even though the room was air-conditioned. I felt exhausted, as if I had been fighting an invisible force for hours. In a moment of clarity, I began thinking about my Upasana Murthy, the deity I regularly offer my prayers to. Suddenly, a verse from a very powerful mantra came to my mind, one that I had never chanted before, the Agora mantra. This mantra is known to ward off negative spirits and entities. I didn't chant it out loud, but I could see the verse of the mantra clearly in my mind. As I mentally recited the mantra, I could feel the weight on top of me start to lessen. Each time I focused on the mantra, the pressure lifted more and more. By the time I finished the 9th repetition of the mantra, my little finger twitched, and I felt a powerful vibration spread throughout my entire body. It was as if I was breaking free from invisible chains. With renewed strength, I opened my eyes and sat up, gasping for air, as if I had been freed from some kind of spiritual restraint. Automatically, I began chanting the Agora mantra aloud, my hands folded in prayer, thanking Agora Rudra Murthy for protecting me. I was drenched in sweat, like I had taken a shower. I immediately went to take a bath to cleanse myself from the ordeal. Afterward, I took some holy ash with me, which I always carry for moments like this. I chanted the Agora mantra again, this time applying a small amount of the holy ash to my forehead and placing a little on the 4 corners of the room. Once I completed the ritual, I returned to my bed, and for the first time in days, I was able to sleep peacefully. There were no more disturbances, no more unsettling feelings. The rest of my stay went without incident, and everything felt calm again. We had utility rooms on the first floor to store our carts and supplies, about 4 rooms in total, 1 in each wing of the building. There was also additional storage down in the basement. Trish and I hit it off right away. My first couple of weeks on the job, she insisted that we go to the basement together whenever we needed supplies. At first, I thought she was just being considerate, worried I might get lost down there. Honestly, it was easy to see why. The basement was a maze of hallways with a ton of rooms on either side, and it was divided into sections for shipping/receiving, the boiler rooms, kitchen supplies, housekeeping storage, and yes, the morgue was down there too. We could either take the elevator or use the stairs to get there. After a while, I got to know the layout pretty well. One day, I was heading toward the elevator to grab some supplies when Trish spotted me. She asked where I was going, and I told her I was just going to the basement. She insisted on coming with me. I told her she didn't have to, since I knew my way around by then, but she insisted. Curious, I asked, "Why?" She said she'd explain after we came back. So we went to the basement, got the supplies, and returned to the first floor. As promised, she invited me into the lounge, where we could talk. The lounge was quiet, just us two, and we sat down on the couch by the window. Trish let out a deep sigh, clearly nervous, and then she told me that the reason she always insisted on having company when she went down there was because of what happened to her. Something strange had occurred that scared her so badly she couldn't go down there alone anymore. I must have read her mind because I said, "You're going to tell me there's a ghost down there, right?" For a moment, she was silent, and then she nodded slowly. She was clearly a little embarrassed. "Please don't think I'm crazy," she said, "but something happened to me that day that scared me to the point I haven't gone down there by myself since." I reassured her, saying, "I don't think you're crazy. I've had my own paranormal experiences too." I told her I'd love to hear her story. Trish had been working at the hospital for a couple of years when I started. She told me that not long after she started, she went down to the basement to get supplies. Nothing out of the ordinary. She was just focused on getting what she needed and returning to her work. But as she was heading back to the elevator, she noticed a young woman with blonde hair standing in front of her. The woman had this startled look on her face, and Trish said she could almost see through her, like she wasn't really there. Trish screamed and dropped her bag. Terrified, she ran straight to the elevator. When she got back to the first floor, she grabbed a security guard and asked him to go down to the basement with her to retrieve her supplies. The guard, clearly concerned by how shaken up she was, didn't question her. He just followed her down to the basement to help. By this point, Trish was nervously wringing her hands. I told her to take a deep breath and relax. Trying to lighten the mood, I said, "Don't fear the ghost. The living can be much more of a problem." She didn't laugh. So, I added, the woman might have just been a living person whose life was cut short, maybe even by a medical mishap. This is a hospital, after all. People die here. Trish seemed to calm down a little, giving me a half smile. "I still don't want to go down there alone," she admitted. "But do you think talking to the ghost might help?" I shrugged. "Well, we'll find out the next time we go down there." As luck would have it, we needed more supplies again a few days later. Trish was adamant that we go together. I didn't mind, and honestly, I was starting to feel curious about the whole thing too. So we headed down to the basement together. When we reached the area where the supplies were kept, I decided it was time to introduce ourselves to our unseen hostess. I spoke calmly, explaining that we weren't there to disturb or harm her. We simply needed some items to do our work. We started gathering supplies when Trish suddenly got annoyed and said, "The paper towels are gone." They were always kept in the same spot on a certain shelf, but now they were nowhere to be found. We checked every shelf, but the paper towels were missing. At that point, I was getting frustrated. I just wanted to know who had moved them, especially since we used them so quickly and needed them now. Then, out of nowhere, we heard a muffled but heavy thud from behind us. Trish let out a little shriek, and I admit I gasped too. When we turned around, there they were. A large banded carton of paper towels, sitting on the floor just a few feet behind us. I couldn't help but say, "Thank you to our unseen helper." I jokingly told her, we never would have seen them up there on top of the shelves if you hadn't helped us. It may have been my imagination, but I swear I heard a soft, feminine voice reply, "You're welcome." I wasn't sure, but it sounded like she answered. When we got back to the floor, we mentioned it to our supervisor. We told him that we had to use a long broom to knock the paper towels down, because they were way up on the top shelf. Too high for us to reach, and we didn't want to risk using a ladder. He apologized and promised to move the towels back to a safer, more accessible place for us. Of course, we didn't mention the ghost part. We figured our supervisor wouldn't exactly believe that a spirit helped us get the paper towels. I'm still doing traffic control, and I've had my share of major gigs where I stand there with the e-stops, those portable traffic lights you see when a traffic controller is standing by the side of the road, looking like they're on the phone, but really, we're just watching the control device or using the stop/slow paddles you probably see around. This time, I'm out in the Tamborine Mountains, near the Gold Coast and close to the border ranges. I had to drive about 3.5 hours from home to get to work, do what I had to do, then drive all the way back home again. Eventually, I convinced my employers to put me up in a local pub with 2 other TCs because by the time we get back home, we're too tired to do anything but get ready again for the next day's shift. They reluctantly agreed to pay for our accommodation at a caravan park out in the middle of nowhere. We stayed in these cabins that were no bigger than tiny homes, but honestly, I wasn't bothered. The view was incredible, and the town was only a 20-minute walk away, though it took us about half an hour to stagger back. We were stoked about the whole thing. Now about this job. We were stationed on a rural road. It was just the 2 of us that day, as the other 2 were on the 6:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. shift, while Robbo had the 5:30 p.m. to 3 a.m. shift. Our team leader, Brett, I think that was his name, but I hadn't worked with him before, was a local council guy. Pretty obvious. He gave me a piece of land with a breathtaking view of the ranges ahead. "Pretty bloody quiet out here," he said as I was getting set up and signed on. "Not much traffic." "Then what's the point of Robbo and I being here?" I asked. "Because, mate, it's part of the job. This is what you get paid for. And for God's sake, don't be weaning. Check out the view," he said, giving me a nod before jumping into his truck and driving off. As you probably know, I'm a bit of a sticky beak. Gotta have a dingo's breakfast, a piss and a look around. I wandered down the road a bit, just soaking in the surroundings. On the left, there was a battered steel guard railing, and beyond that, a small creek flowing through an open paddock, empty of cattle, with a forest rising up towards the ranges. On the right, huge gray ghost gums, I think that's what they were, lined the road with another forest climbing up the slope. The road itself was cracked tarmac, winding through the bush, and I don't know, there was something about the place that felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It had this strange, haunted vibe. Weird way to describe it, I know, but it felt like I was being watched. It was late afternoon, and as the shadows crept in, the trees and bushes seemed to take on strange shapes. This landscape felt different. That's when my two-way crackled. It was Robbo doing a radio check. I answered back and started heading to my post. Still nothing. F*** Kane hell, Robbo, not funny, mate. Got this dickhead coming in fast. I'm already holding the stop. Billy, you're the team leader. Answer me. Is it clear to send him through? My radio was fully charged, but still no response. The distance was 17 kilometers, and the road was clear except for some gullies and small hills. But no one answered. I wasn't risking my life for some idiot, so I threw down my paddle and stepped aside. The night was dead silent. First, I heard it. It sounded like a bus really speeding down the mountain, gears grinding and tearing at the engine, followed by screeches, several screeches, as if something had tumbled over the edge. I didn't see any lights or anything that showed where the vehicle had gone, and then just silence. That's when I saw him. A boy. He was dressed like a 12-year-old from the 1930s, gray shorts, a wool vest over a yellow shirt, and a school cap twisted sideways. He looked dazed, but otherwise fine. I didn't move, just called out, "Hey kid, you all right there?" He turned to look at me, but then just walked back into the darkness. I grabbed my radio, which was now finally working, and called out again, but he was gone. I looked around, hoping to find some wreckage, but there was nothing. Nothing at all. I felt a chill run down my spine, unsure of what had just happened. Had I just seen a kid who had fallen to his death? I tried the radio again, but no one answered. Then, finally, the radio crackled to life. No one had heard anything, but I knew what I saw. To me, it was real. The rest of the night passed without incident. We swapped shifts with the other team members, got a few hours of sleep, and I tried to push what happened out of my mind. A few days later, 3 days before we were to leave, Denise, another traffic controller, told us a story. She had heard the bus, the screeches, and saw the boy. That was when I told the whole group what I had experienced. One of us, not me, went up to Billy, the local team leader, and confronted him about it. He came over to the campsite and told us something tragic. It turns out the boy I saw was part of a school excursion from 1935. The bus, carrying 47 children and 4 teachers, had fallen off the same road I was working on. The driver, who was very drunk, lost control and sent the bus tumbling over the edge. The boy I saw, along with several other kids, was one of the victims. Billy said that no one really knew which child it was, but it seemed like he had been trying to find his way home all this time. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Apologies for the interruption. If you're enjoying the content, give it a thumbs up and let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. We were watching the news one night and saw the Twin Falls in Idaho all lit up with changing lights, and we decided to go. It's about a 2-hour drive, so my wife booked a room at a dog-friendly motel. We hit the road with our year-old pup, and the drive there was great. We arrived in Twin Falls, found our motel, and unloaded our things. The room was really nice, looking brand new. We walked around the building, and other dogs were coming and going. We could hear shouting from a busy Mexican restaurant next door, and people were bringing in presents. My wife wanted a margarita, so she headed to the restaurant, and I took the pup for a walk around the front of the building, near the main drag, with traffic zipping by. As it got closer to dark, we asked the front desk for directions to the falls. It was just a short drive from the motel. When we got there, the falls were lit up beautifully, with a credit union lighting them up for the evening. We could see the top of the falls, with water crashing far below. It was well worth the drive. After spending some time there, we headed back to the motel. We were laying on the bed, with the pup between us, and just playing around with him. My wife said she needed to go to the front desk to discuss our bill, as we somehow ended up with 2 rooms. I stayed behind on the left side of the bed, close to the edge, while the pup was in the middle. I was messing with him, giggling at his playful grunts, when suddenly the mattress behind me started lifting a few times, almost like waves hitting a boat sideways. It was very noticeable. I quickly looked behind me, but there was nothing there. I weighed about 205 lbs at the time, and the mattress was a tall one, so it wasn't easy to lift, especially with me right at the edge. I told my wife about it when she came back, but we went to bed, thankful for the great day we had. Around 3:30 a.m., my wife woke me up, moving around and sounding a little annoyed. She said, "Something is moving the bed over here." We both just fell back asleep. In the morning, I went for coffee and told the front desk staff about what had happened. The receptionist said it hadn't happened before. Later, I asked the motel staff about any issues in room 113, and a few of them shook their heads, saying no. I lifted the mattress and saw it had a small spring and metal band system. I took pictures to document it, thinking I could debunk it somehow. The bed system was sturdy, with painted seal sides, and I could see the floor past the metal webbing. It was a new Sealy mattress. I later called the motel to ask if anyone had experienced the bed shaking, and the lady who answered said she'd worked there for a while and had never heard of anything like that happening before. I hung up, wondering if it had happened before, since I'd mentioned it to the front desk and a group of workers. I've thought about whether the bed spring system could have caused it, but as a metal fabricator, I really doubt it, especially considering our weights. This all happened in March 2022. This incident happened when I was about 17 years old in 1980. My father was in the military and stationed at a large Air Force base in San Antonio, Texas. We lived in an older house in a neighborhood near the base. Over the 4 years we lived there, we had a few strange experiences. One that stands out happened one afternoon when I was home alone. Our house had been converted from a garage into a living room by the previous owners. My younger sister, who was 5 at the time, refused to sleep in that room. When my mother asked her why, my sister pointed to the corner and said a man had hanged himself there. She never slept in that room, and we moved her into a different room soon after. Another strange event occurred when my mother started having recurring dreams about a woman visiting my other sister in her sleep. One night, my parents heard a loud crash coming from the kitchen, as if all the cabinets had been thrown open, but when they checked, nothing was out of place. Things got weirder when I woke up one night to find a solid black figure standing next to my bed. I jumped out of bed and swung my pillow at it, but when I fully woke up, there was nothing there. I couldn't tell if I had imagined it or if it had been real, but something definitely startled me out of sleep. We had 2 dogs, Jess, a full chow, and PT, her half-chow son. PT was known in the neighborhood as a very protective dog. One afternoon, when I was home alone, I was lounging on the couch, not really paying attention to anything. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang on the back door, followed by PT barking like crazy. I thought someone might be trying to break into the house, but the windows had bars on them, and it was still afternoon. I opened the door to find PT running past me and Jess acting strange, pacing around on the porch. I went to the hallway and found PT growling fiercely, standing still with his back hair raised. I tried calling him to come with me, but he wouldn't budge. His focus was on something in the hallway that I couldn't see. I walked down the hallway to check, but everything looked normal. P2 remained at the front of the hall, growling deeply, and wouldn't follow me. I decided to go outside and wait for my family to return. As I opened the back door, PT suddenly stopped growling, shook his head, and went back to being his usual happy self. Jess came inside as if nothing had happened. But before they both walked away, PT gave one last deep growl and kicked his back legs down the hallway, as if covering up something. To this day, I'm not sure what happened, but it was definitely the strangest experience I had while living there. It makes me wonder what would have happened if my dogs hadn't been there to protect me. After that, nothing strange occurred again in the house, but I've always wondered about that moment. In early 2010, my family and I lived in a house that shared a garden and an outdoor bathroom with my relatives. There was also a large kumquat tree in the garden, and this tree played a role in a strange occurrence that happened several years later. In 2009, my relatives welcomed a baby girl into their family. However, despite being a baby, the child cried nonstop. No matter what my relatives did to soothe her, she wouldn't stop crying. Even after taking her to the doctor, the medical tests showed nothing wrong, which made it all the more baffling. Fast forward to 2014, a year after I retired from the Marine Corps. I had taken up a job at a hotel, and one day, while I was working there, my relative came to me and asked, "Why do you walk around the yard wearing derby shoes at night? It's very rude behavior." I replied, "Why would I walk around the yard in those shoes at night? They're uncomfortable." My relative then suggested, "When is your day off?" I told them it was Thursday. "Great," they said. "Please don't wear your derby shoes that day. I need to figure out what's going on with the sound." I agreed to their request and promised I would move all 3 pairs of derby shoes I had at home to my relative's place just to be sure. I didn't think much of it, but my relative had some spiritual abilities, so I trusted their judgment. On the day of my day off, I ended up drinking too much and stayed in, not leaving the house at all. The next day, I went to work at the hotel, and later in the evening, my relative gathered the family to discuss the situation. They explained what had been happening, the strange footsteps at night that sounded like derby shoes in the yard. When my relative opened the door to the yard and heard those footsteps in the empty yard, they immediately knew something wasn't right. That was when the baby started crying, and they connected the dots. Apologies for the interruption. If you're enjoying the content, give it a thumbs up and let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My relative then mentioned the kumquat tree in the garden, saying that the energy around the tree had changed over time and felt very negative. This led to the decision to call in a shaman to investigate the situation. The shaman visited a few days later and examined the kumquat tree. He explained that it wasn't a bad ghost, but a mischievous spirit. The shaman asked if any derby shoes had gone missing in the house, and when we confirmed that one of my relative's pairs of shoes had disappeared, the shaman explained that the ghost was wearing those shoes and finding the baby's crying amusing. The shaman then performed a ritual, burning an amulet in front of the tree and warning the ghost to stop its actions. He also said that if the baby's crying continued and the footsteps persisted, cutting down the kumquat tree would eliminate the problem. For a month, everything seemed to settle down. But then, one night, I heard the sound of footsteps in the yard again, the unmistakable sound of derby shoes. The baby's crying returned, and it was clear the phenomenon hadn't been fully resolved. I also heard the footsteps while walking to the outdoor bathroom, with no one else around. It felt like someone invisible was walking right next to me. In the end, my grandfather decided to cut down the kumquat tree. After spraying a strong herbicide to kill its roots, the footsteps stopped. The baby's crying also ceased, and peace returned to our home.